Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest is retired DEA Special Agent Wesley Tabor, and author of the new book, Infiltrate America, Blood Routes and the Rise of Latin American Gangs. Wes, hey, thank you for joining me today, and I think we're going to have a great conversation.
I think so too. Thanks for having me.
For sure, for sure. Well, hey, do you mind if I kick things off by reading your bio to kind of set the stage for the conversation we're going to have today?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right, here we go. Wes completed his first police academy in Citrus County, Florida in 1988 and later became a Hernando County Sheriff's Deputy. He served in that capacity until January of 1998. As a deputy, Wes served as a SWAT lead, having completed the Federal Bureau of Investigation SWAT school in 1995. Wes was a defensive tactics instructor, anti-crime and property detective, and earned the Florida Medal of Valor in 1996. After his departure from the sheriff's office, he was hired by the Drug Enforcement Administration. He had a 23-year career with the DEA and has been stationed in various field divisions such as St. Louis, Miami, Chicago, D.C., and Los Angeles, and international cities such as Guatemala City, Caracas, Cartagena, and Bogota, Colombia. During that time, he was representing the DEA in positions such as Supervisory Special Agent, Country Attaché, Assistant Country Attaché, Deputy Section Chief, Assistant to the Global Deputy Chief of Operations, and Assistant Special Agent in Charge. From 2012 to 2015, Wes was assigned to the Central Intelligence Agency as an assignee to various locations in the Western Hemisphere, conducting various classified activities on behalf of DEA while embedded with the CIA. He has worked with some of the most prestigious law enforcement and military agencies conducting operations and training modules with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Secret Service, Defense Intelligence Service, U.S. Army Special Forces, and Navy SEALs. As a DEA agent rising through the ranks to Assistant Special Agent in Charge in Los Angeles, he was the division's strike force commander, where he oversaw global money laundering investigations, high-value Mexican cartel investigation, and led his teams in pursuit of some of the largest cases on the globe. Wes has successfully trained hundreds of individuals across the Western Hemisphere on interdiction, undercover operations, wiretap procedures, gangs, case operations, and controlled deliveries of narcotics, both in the United States and internationally. After his DEA retirement in 2020, Wes went on to be the Seminole Police Homeland Security Lieutenant for 9 Hard Rock properties in Florida. His work included all cyber, counterterrorism, and executive protection investigations and details for the Seminole tribe, including details for the Miss Universe organization, Governor Ron DeSantis, various U.S. senators and congressmen, while on any of the 9 Seminole Indian tribal properties. In 2021, West was recruited as a global director for the Spanish-based security firm leading the Global Risk Services division. He was responsible for global operations with regard to intelligence, analytical, and executive protection operations for many Fortune 500 companies. He's been featured in National Geographic specials, Newsmax, and Fox News, and is often called upon for expert opinion for the national and international newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal, Fox News Digital, Coffee or Die Magazine, the Associated Press, The Sun, and more. Wes, that is an awesome bio.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's turned into a hobby for me now.
Yeah, it sounds like it. When you retired, you did not retire.
It's funny. When I retired, I couldn't stay out of it. We'll get into it a little bit, but when I retired, I went to Montana for a few months in a cabin and was snowed in. And after a few weeks, I was like, I'm going to start writing a book and start documenting stuff, and had plans to start working again, but this time on my terms.
There you go. Man, that's a great plan. And speaking of book, I'd like to cover that here towards the conclusion of our conversation today, but I want to mention it. Infiltrate America, Blood Routes and the Rise of Latin American Gangs. That's a relatively new book that's out, correct?
Yeah, it just came out a month or so ago, and I wrote it as more of a passion project. It's kind of a niche thing, right? Like you're looking at Latin American gangs. It's niche, but then when you look at it on the whole scale of what's going on in the country and the infiltration of what's happening with everything on the border, the gangs, the crime, and everything associated with the influx of all these people, we have no clue who they are. And you 11 million people, and how many are going to be criminals, right? So,
Right.
and we can talk about that a little bit more, but that's why I wrote the book.
Good deal. Yeah, we're going to cover that in more detail here at the conclusion of our conversation. Well, hey, let's start out with, I read the bio, very, just an incredible bio, rich in law enforcement experience. But could you maybe share with the listeners why did Wes get into law enforcement in the first place? What caused you to do that?
So, I'm in my mid 50s, right? So I grew up in the 70s and 80s. A great time to be a kid, right? BMX bikes, BJ and the Bear, Miami Vice, all those things. So I grew up in a very poor family. We were very poor when I was a kid. At one point, we were actually living in a bus in the middle of the woods in New England.
Wow.
And I was kind of like searching at that time, like, what am I going to do with my life? Even at 8, 9 years old, you're like, you start idolizing people, right? So this is when you have all these you have Breaker Breaker. Remember that movie that
Oh,
came out with McCall, who was singing Convoy and all that stuff, right?
absolutely.
Movies
Yeah.
like that. You had BJ and the Bear. For the viewers that are younger, if they're watching, it was a truck driver was going around the country, always got into different problems, and he would solve the problems, and all this activity would go on. And he had a chimpanzee that was in the truck with him. And then later on, Clint Eastwood had Any Which Way But Lose, right? So, and then he had a
Right.
monkey in his truck and all that stuff. So I was like, I'm going to be a truck driver, right? And truck drivers were like almost idolized back then. And for good reason. I mean, they make America move, right? They give us all the products that we have. We wouldn't
Yep.
have cell phones. We wouldn't have ladders or computers or chairs, if we didn't have truck drivers. So, at a young age, I started drawing all these trucks. And back then it was the cab over the flat front
Yep.
you don't see much anymore.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to be a truck driver. And my stepfather, who's now passed on, he was a felon. He was a career criminal, and he had been in jail. And what caused his downfall was, well, number one, he didn't have a good upbringing. Unfortunately, he just didn't. He didn't have a father. His mother didn't, unfortunately, take care of him very well. And he started drinking and drugs and all these things. And by the time he's 15, 16, he's robbing liquor stores, stealing cars, doing all this stuff. So he ends up in prison. The last time I think they sent some 5 or 6 years, and when he told me, little kid talking to me about, hey, don't take this path in life. You need to do something good. And he was telling me about how when the bar shut after that 5, 6 year sentence, he was like, wow, what am I going to do? I'm actually in prison, because he had been in and out, in and out, in and out, county, county, county. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and never really had to pay the piper. Well, the last time that he robbed something, and he actually had escaped. He actually had escaped and he ran for a while and then he got tired and he went to a police station in the Midwest. He walked in, he said, "Hey, my name is this. I'm a wanted, fugitive." And they're like, "Yeah, have a seat.
Right.
We'll be right with you," right? Next thing you know, five guys come out with guns drawn, put him face down on the floor of the police station. They handcuff him, bring him in, right? So he was telling me all these stories as I was growing up. And I had tried to get into some sports as a kid. I lived in a very rural part of the Northeast, and I just didn't have like an advocate for me. I didn't when I went to try out for baseball. I walked. It was probably about a 2.5, 3 mile walk through this woods. It's like a cut through where I lived to where the baseball field and the tryouts were. And I get there. I didn't have a glove. I had no baseball. I had nothing, right? I mean, and I show up and I'm basically just ignored. There's no one to advocate for me. I'm like 10 years old and I just kind of looking around. I'm like, "Hey, I'm here to try out." They're like, "Yeah, okay." I was ignored. So I just turned around and walked home and I'm like, "Man, what am I gonna do here?"
Yeah.
Well, fast forward a couple years, we had moved to another location. I had tried out Boy Scouts. Same thing. I get there and some of the parents treated me like, this kid has no money, he's poor, my clothes were kind of raggedy. And they're looking at me like, "What are you doing here, kid? Like, why don't you buzz off, right?" That's how I felt. And I was probably 12, 13 years old at the time. I'm like, "Man, what am I going to do?" Well, I happened to meet a kid who was telling me that he was a junior policeman. And this junior policeman was a classmate of mine. He goes, "Hey, it's fantastic. You got all these cops. They're all state troopers." At the time, I was in Minnesota, and you're like a junior cop. You have a uniform and everything. They teach you all the stuff on how to be a policeman, and it's kind of like Boy Scouts, but with cops. I'm like, I don't want anything to do with the Boy Scouts because I had a bad experience. He goes, "No, no, no, no. Trust me. Just come and try this thing. We'll even come pick you up or whatever." And so I go to this first thing, and these troopers are in there. There's like 3 or 4 troopers, and I walk in, a kind of ragtag looking kid, no money, my shoes are all dirty, and I just kind of ragtaggy. And they're like, "Hey man, how you doing, brother?" And the guy shakes my hand. "Come on in. You want to be a cop? We're gonna show you how to do it. Come on." And they didn't care how I looked, that I didn't have the certain kind of clothing on. They just treated me like a young kid who wanted to be a cop, and they were so cool. Like I was like, "Wow, these guys are so nice." And their uniforms are all perfect. This Minnesota State Trooper, the hats and the brass and the leather belts and all. I was like, "Wow, these guys are really cool." So I got hooked immediately just because they're so friendly. So they kind of walked me through, till I was 14 and 15, and then we moved again. But that gave me that spark of like, wow, I was doing ride-alongs. I'm in the police car, we're running code, we're going I'm like, this is just unbelievably cool. Pretty young to be thinking how dangerous it was because it was so dangerous. And he told me, "Listen, if anything happens, you're hauling ass. This is what you're gonna do. You're gonna go to a house, you're gonna knock on the door, whatever. If anything happens to me." Guy was a very solid guy. His name was Pepin, Trooper Pepin. So, so that's how I got involved and sparked into law enforcement. So fast forward a few years, I graduate from high school. Miserable, miserable academic record in high school. I mean, it was really pathetic. Like I think, but I don't know if the laws changed there, but in Florida and some of the other southern states, the laws are you have to have like a C minus to, like a 2.0 or something to graduate. I had like a
Sure.
1.7. I had like a D plus, and I still graduated. I was like, "Woo, win." So I graduate from high school, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm not the dullest either, right? So I'm kind of,
Yeah.
but what I did is I just lacked focus. I lacked focus. I lacked direction, and even though my parents did their best to kind of give it to me, it just wasn't sticking, right? So I graduate from high school and I relocate to the Tampa, Florida area near Citrus County, Florida. And that's when I go to find out like how to become a cop. And they're like, yeah, first 50 in line, come in. If you're sponsoring yourself, you're paying your own way. And I think at the time it was like $150,
Wow.
$200 or something. It was so
Yeah.
cheap. I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact amount, but it was under like $300, right? You show up with a driver's license, put that with your cash, you're in. If you're the first 50 people, right? So I show up at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm like number 15. I'm like, woo, I made it, And so I give my license. I give the whatever the down payment was, which is probably all the money I had in my pocket because I was broke. And we started the academy a month later. And I remember this is kind of how it was back in the day. Let me just tell you this story. So I'm sitting in the back row, T, my last name Tabor, right? So they do it alphabetically, Tubw, right? So we're at the very end.
Sure.
There's a guy like 3 or 4 down from me, and he has a girl his age sitting with him, like in between the other student and him, right? And I'm here, and they're here, and everything that the instructor was saying, she was like talking to him and writing for him. And I'm like, what's the deal here? So fast forward 2 weeks, I come into class, he's gone. This is like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks in. He's gone and she's gone. I'm like, hey, what happened? Oh, he couldn't read and write. She was just, writing
Oh,
everything and helping him read. That was his role.
wow.
I'm like, really?
Yeah. How does that work? Yeah,
How
exactly.
did that? There's no test to get in. This is 35 years,
What?
36 years ago, right? Or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just in rural Florida. And this guy, we just got in, and he was expected that you could read and write. And
Yeah.
everyone was just kind of like, holy geez, this is ridiculous. So anyway,
Right.
we went through the academy. It was a really good academy. It wasn't a full-time academy. You would go home at like 7 o'clock at night and come back again at like 7 a.m. And
Mm-hmm.
you would do
Sure.
everything for the day. And then sometimes on the weekends we had to do stuff. It wasn't like, where you're staying there all the time. And I was 18 years old when I applied, 19 when I graduated. Florida laws, you have to be 19. So I remember, he called me in, the director. How old are you? And I was like, uh-oh. I said, I'm 18. He's like, Jesus, oh my God. I said, but I turned 19 in like a month before we graduate. And he's like, what? I said, yeah, I turned 19 before I graduate. So I'll be 19. So we'll be good. He's like, Jesus. He said, keep your mouth shut. Kern was his name. Kern, Director Kern, retired Tampa cop. He's like, keep your mouth shut, or if you say anything, you're out. I was like, I'm not saying anything. So
Yeah,
I had my
exactly.
birthday, and I'm like, yes. And then when I got my certificate, when we did the graduation, he looks at me and he shakes my hand. He's like, pulls me in. Good job. Like that. So this is kind of like, the funny
It,
side or kind of
yeah.
sad side of law enforcement at the time. But the other good side was, listen, we had these instructors out of Vietnam, and you want to learn how to live and survive. These guys lived and survived, and they taught us how to live and survive. Our tactical instruction, firearms instruction was awesome. These guys were brutally hardcore. I mean, some of the tactics they were teaching actually were technically illegal, I guess. They were illegal, like handcuff a guy, use him as a shield and walk through the house and things like that. And that they were teaching us that, teaching us
Wow.
that. And I'm like, this seems like it might be a violation of rights. Like we just had legal and then they didn't talk about that in there, like, and so
Right.
there was good and bad and everything. But in the end, these guys, these guys had been operating in the 60s and 70s, just wild times, wild shootouts, the military experience of Vietnam. And then some of that did kind of bleed over in what we were trained, but overall, it was really a solid training. And of course, when you get out of the academy, you move on to your field training and so forth. But
Right.
because I was sponsored myself, I didn't have that. So I graduate from the academy. I'm like 19 years old. I look like a little stick figure, right? I wish I looked like that again sometimes, but I go I go looking for a job. No one, I mean, they wouldn't even pay attention to me. Wouldn't even give me the time of day. So I said, man, I gotta do something. I have no, everyone's asking me, do you have any college? And back in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of cops didn't have degrees.
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
street cops didn't have degrees. If you had a degree, you were looked at like, wow, this guy's educated, like an undergrad.
Yeah. It's almost like most did not have it as opposed to today's standards or world.
That's right. Were they
Yeah.
all right?
Yeah.
Not all, but I think it was like 80-20, and now it's a 20-80,
Yeah, I
right?
think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, roughly. So yeah, I said, man, I got to go to school. So I took the entrance test for a community college, and they were laughing like, dude, you can't, your grades are horrible, your skills are terrible. You got to take like 5 remedial courses just to get into the basics. I was like,
Oh
what?
man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I did it, but I was like, all right, I need to get serious. And I ended
Yeah,
up,
you were focused, it sounds like.
well, I had to be. What am I
Yeah.
gonna do? You know, I, I have this academy thing going on. I'm 19 years old. I'm living in Florida. My family was all up north, and here I am kind of trying to find my own way. And I was like, wow, what am I gonna do? Right. So I realized quickly, like, man, I've got to do something. And I had talked with my stepfather about focusing in life and not doing the wrong things. And look what he did. He went through prison and all these things. So he did play a pivotal role in that direction, taking that direction, even though for him it was kind of uncomfortable in a sense when the policeman or the trooper would come to get me. Desmond Pepin was his name. He was a trooper I was rode with. And they would look at each other, but they never talked. He'd be by the garage doing something, and he'd kind of look at the trooper, and he'd kind of nod to him, and the trooper would kind of nod to him. It's like they knew,
Yeah.
now you're a cop so many years, you can look and you start reading those nonverbal cues, and you
Correct.
really understand that sixth sense of what someone's kind of made of, or what you
Yeah.
think, there might be
Yeah.
something
You
behind.
formulate a pretty accurate opinion.
Yeah, you do. You do in many senses, right? We don't rely on that fully and completely, but it does take
Right.
up a very large part of what we do, right? So it's like a poker player. Same thing, psychologist, marital counselor, all these professions, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever. So yeah. So anyway, fast forwarding, I was like, man, got my 2 year degree, ended up getting a job with the sheriff's office. Luckily for me, they had plenty of openings at that time. This was in 1992. So I started
Okay.
process 91, 92. I'm hired. And it was a great sheriff's office, but it was early 90s, crazy stories like, and some of the other programs I've done, I've talked about it where, I went out on a training day and I have an officer who's actually in uniform, and then my FTO, my field training officer, because the first 3 or 4 months you with the field training officer teaches you the ropes on the road, right? He's like, you're going to do traffic stop on this guy, and we're going to practice traffic stops because they're very dangerous, right? Probably second to the domestic violence situations is cops get killed, right?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, cool. So I have full duty belt, I have my gun. We were just started out with 357s, J-frame, Smith and Wesson revolvers, and then we
Yeah.
went to the Glock. So I thought, I'm hot shit. I got my Glock 17 or whatever. So I pull the car over, initiate the stop. He pulls over. I get out of the car and I'm walking up, and remember, I'm 21 years old, right? So I'm walking up. The door opens and he rolls out. The police officer rolls out with a pistol, a revolver. As he rolls out, he starts shooting at me. Well, I mean, I'm just in reaction mode, right? I pull my gun and my FTO grabs me. What are you doing? Jesus. And I'm like, what is, and I realize they're blanks because he unloaded the revolver on me
Oh
at about,
wow.
at about 30 feet, 40 feet as I'm walking up to the car. And I holster my gun. I go, what are you guys doing? Like,
Right. What are you
hell is going
doing?
on here? You put me in a position where I'm going to react. with a live gun with this guy. I'm thinking is a live weapon, and it was a
Right.
very trying moment. And they realized wow, we really screwed this up because I could have shot this guy if I had been a little faster and the FTO hadn't been with me. Thankfully, he was right
Yeah.
with me. Maybe I would have stopped myself, but I mean, put yourself in that position, right? You're like, you just react. And that's exactly what I did. So they were like, yeah, let's just forget this ever happened. We're just gonna go, let's get lunch, you know.
Right. There wasn't a lot
Yeah,
of forethought put into that training scenario.
you think? Listen, they were really good officers. They were,
Right.
but they just, for whatever reason, they just had this lapse in judgment. I never really talked about it again. I've never even said their names. They're super good guys. They were really good
Sure.
police officers. They're all retired now. And I think, yeah, they're all retired now. So I never held it against them. Yeah, I was just like, I just want to be a cop, right?
Right.
So going through my career, I'm in patrol, and then at patrol, you start getting a name for yourself, going out there and making callers on people, arresting the bad guys. Then I got on SWAT. I got FBI SWAT school at Cape Canaveral, which was a really great experience. It was a 2 week school, and we're rappelling off towers. We're going into these tunnels that are spread out all over Cape Canaveral in Florida. And
Hmm.
I remember we were doing, I think it was a 15-mile exercise where we had to run, carry logs. We had to do gas mask shooting. It was like a 15-mile obstacle and shoot. It was an excellent. I mean, I'm 20 at the time. I'm like 25 years old, right? This is a piece of cake for me.
Right.
So we jump into one of the tunnels, and we're going down the tunnel, and we had to do an exercise to gather something, then come back up and then clear something, and then we had to go back to a run obstacle. So we go down in this thing, and all of a sudden these big doors all close in this tunnel. Clink, 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 clink.
Oh.
Boom, boom, boom. Gas. Oh,
Oh.
geez. Locked us in, man. Locked us
Oh
in. We had
man.
gas masks. Now, at this time, we were kind of doing this buddy system gas mask thing where you had a mask on your back. You could retrieve it yourself, but what we did immediately was we all formed into a line, and everyone grabbed a mask, and then you turn and they'd assist you, and everyone put their masks on. But it was like
Okay.
a team effort kind of thing, but you could do your own too. It was really, when it was synchronized, it was fast as hell. You
Yeah.
could, like, it worked really well, but you had to be disciplined and trained in it, just like anything, right? Muscle memory. So we're in there, and of course, guys are throwing up in the mask and everything else. You've been through CS mask,
Hmm.
gas. It's just a terrible experience, right? So we did stuff like that. Great range days, great repelling time. I actually found a VHS tape of the Academy a couple months ago, and I have to digitize it and
Oh
break it
yeah.
into a CD. And I'm going to look at it because here I am, 25 years old, and I'm on top of the tower, and the whole tower was moving. I was like 275 pounds at the time, right? So we have two instructors up there, a belay on the bottom, right? And we did
Hmm.
single rope at the time. We were doing single rope belay. And so I'm on this thing like this, and he's like, "Easy, big boy." And I wasn't even moving. The tower was just, some of these towers aren't.
Yeah.
It was safe, but it was really moving. So it was a great experience going to the FBI SWAT school. And so I get done with that. Of course, start doing SWAT calls and just, everything from, barricaded subjects to high risk search warrants and things like that. So it was a wonderful experience, especially for a young cop.
For
And I hadn't
sure.
really been exposed too much to narcotics work at that time. I was never in narcotics. I was never in vice narcotics, but I was in street crimes. In street crimes, of course, you're going to run into narcotics all the time. So it's almost like anti-crime, and for people that don't understand what anti-crime is, sometimes when people say, "Oh, you're out there violating rights," that's like a big thing now. We're
Yeah.
going to go out there and we're going to film you and we're going to bait you into violating our rights so we can sue you and get a payday and views on YouTube. So that didn't exist too much back then. But for people to understand, when you're doing anti-crime, what you're doing is you're trying to stop the crimes before they're committed, and you stop them legally. You actually have a reason to intervene, and it's the method and madness and how you intervene that could mean the difference between violating someone's rights and not violating their rights. Well, we would do the right thing, and we would sometimes, I remember we would just show up and walk, and all these unmarked cars would come out, and the criminals would be like, "Holy sh! We got like 12 guys out here. Where'd they come from?"
Right.
Gone, right? Solve the problem. We'll go after them later and look for some other evidence or whatever. But, if you're dealing with convenience store robberies, you're dealing with bank robberies, sometimes you can't let the criminals go into these spots because, if you see a weapon or whatever it might be, it's going to be problematic that they get in because then you might have the public at risk. You're always going to have a potential for public risk when you're doing these kinds of operations. I remember we were following a homicide suspect, and I was on a bicycle, and we had the old bone headphones.
Oh, yeah.
It would do the
Yep.
vibration to the bone with the
Old
neck.
school. Yep.
Very old school stuff. We had a helo up. It was actually a McDonnell Douglas Notar, so it didn't have a tail. It had the exhaust that would come out the tail and had a directional,
Oh,
and the
man.
exhaust would keep it. It was a very quiet helicopter. So at a mile away with a big eye on it, you were seeing everything, and you couldn't hear this helicopter. So I was following him on my bicycle, street crimes, helping out homicide. And I remember we went to this, he would go through these neighborhoods and we're waiting for him to like get a break in because he had killed a bunch of people, right? So we were like, when do you go in? What do you do? The helo, I'm there. We had other guys in cars. It was really interesting stuff to do, but it's very risky because you don't want to be discovered. You have to have
Right.
communication with the team and all these things. And I remember he went back to his house. It was like almost like a log cabin with a porch on the front, but it was ground level. It wasn't raised up like on stilts or anything. It was ground level porch. And I'm in the bushes, like maybe 50, 40 yards away, and they had a hedge line. And I'm in the bushes and I'm looking. I dumped the bike back some ways and I kind of crawled up and I'm watching. And all of a sudden he came out of the house and he went right, like looked right at me, I thought. And I'm like, shit. And I remember reaching down, like kind of reaching down and getting my gun without trying not to move and bringing it up and I'm laying prone to put the gun out, right? And he's on the porch looking at me, but he wasn't looking at me. He's just like, at the time, I'm thinking, oh my God, he sees me. He didn't see me. He was just like this, and then he lights a cigarette, and he's just sitting there smoking a cigarette, looking in my direction. And they're calling me, "Hey,
Oh,
are you okay?"
man.
I couldn't say anything. In
Right.
fact, it was cold out that night, and I was so afraid he might see. So I'm trying to cover my mouth with and have my gun, and I'm like, wow, that's craziness, right? In my mind, I'm like, how did I get myself in this spot? I mean, I was safe enough away. I didn't want to compromise the case.
Right.
Now, he could have had a rifle, he could have whatever. He didn't in this case. He finished his cigarette, did this, and went back inside, right? And then come to find out, he was another criminal. He wasn't actually the homicide suspect. He was another suspect in a string of other things. But at the time, I thought this was the guy that had killed, like, I believe it was 6 or 7 women he had raped and killed.
Oh,
That was
man.
another suspect on another case we had. But so we were dealing with some really crazy criminals, It's great experience in learning how to do surveillance, how to deal with some of these violent criminals, how to intercede when necessary, all the things you want to learn when you're a police officer, right?
Right.
So, you had some drug busts, things like that, kilos of coke on the interstates, and I started getting interested in narcotics work. And I just didn't know if I would like it. You see the vice narcotics guys, all long hair, wearing their Vans, holy pants. They're out doing spies. The guy's pulling a recorder out of his groin. I got it. I got it. I'm like, geez, I don't know if I,
Yeah. You're like, is this for me?
yeah, do I really want to live like this, right?
Right.
So my buddy on the SWAT team, he was my sergeant actually, and he was one of the SWAT commanders. He went to the bureau, right? So he goes to the bureau, and after like a year and a half or so, we're talking, and I'm like, I had finished my 4-year degree, graduated with honors this time, not
There
with
you
a
go.
not with a D, right?
Yep,
I
there you
actually
go.
graduated with honors because I was pretty focused. And he's like, he goes, nah, dude, I don't think you're gonna like the bureau, bro. It's kind of boring what I'm doing. At the time, he was kind of stuck doing like some, fraud cases or something like that. He really wasn't doing what he wanted to. Later on, he did, but at that time, he's
Hmm.
like, "Ugh, I don't know, dude, if you want to do this." So I was like, let me start investigating. He had told me about DEA and how those guys go all over the place. I had looked them up, like 67 countries DEA was in. They were doing crazy stuff in the Caribbean. They're flying jungle missions. They're doing stuff in the Middle East. It's crazy, right? So I was like, man, I got to do something like this. At the time, I was like 26 years old, right? So I put my application in, and for those that understand, you want to be an 1811 in the Fed system. Back then, it might be a 2, 3 year process.
Oh yeah,
I
it,
don't
it
know what
was
it was.
long and agonizing, and there was great competition for that.
Yeah, yeah. When I showed up in Orlando for my first interview panel, it was three agents, senior agent of 14, and I think it was another senior agent or the recruiter. And there were like 30 guys in the waiting room.
Hmm.
And the military guys, officers, master's degrees. I'm like, oh shit. Oh. Here I
Right.
am. I have a 4 year degree in some police work. I was a detective about a year after I put my application in. I had become a detective. I was doing property crimes. You start doing property crimes and you advance to more persons crimes and so forth. And so I remember talking to a bunch of people. They're like, yeah, I was a captain in the Marine Corps and I'm this and that. And I have a master's. And I'm like, oh shit. They're gonna call me. Luckily, I got called. And then you gotta, between the drug screen, the health screen, the polygraph, the background, it's a lot. And people like, oh, these police officers, they don't have to go through anything, they're not
Right.
educated, they're this, they're that. If you can pass all of these things, listen, you're a pretty clean individual for the most part, right? There's
Right. It's
exceptions,
a thorough process.
very thorough. And it took me 2.5 years to get through it. And so here I am, detective and doing property crimes, and all of a sudden I get a phone call one day. And, I mean, we didn't have cell phones when I first started law enforcement. We had brick phones. No one had a brick phone. And then
Right.
the bag phone came out. Everyone had a bag phone. And we would call 911 to talk to a dispatcher and have them place a call for us. Pre-call, right?
Yeah.
911, boom, boom. So every deputy's doing this till one day the captain comes in. He goes, "You sons of bitches, you're all gonna fry if you do this one more time. It's called theft of services. It's a fucking crime." We're all like, "Oh shit, we didn't even think." You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
hey
Yeah.
Janet, what's up? Can you patch me through to whatever? We weren't thinking it's
Right.
actually a crime. So he's like, and so AT&T or whoever it was at the time, they're like, "We're gonna give you a pass. It's all good. We understand. We didn't, we're not trying to jam you guys up. We're not gonna file charges on all of you."
No
Like,
harm, no foul.
yeah, don't do it anymore. So everyone stopped, right? We're like, oh shit, we didn't even think about it. So we stopped. But I mean, this is the era that I was a cop in, right? And then when I
Yeah.
talked to, I remember later in my career, I was talking to this guy who's like almost 80 years old. And he was a task force guy. He was a police officer. He goes, yeah, before that, I was a DEA agent. I said, when were you an agent? He goes, oh, like 75, the first first
Wow.
year of DEA, right?
Yeah, that's at the
Until like
beginning.
95 or 96. I'm like, holy shit. He goes, yeah, and I was a police officer before that in the late 50s. And I was
Holy
like,
smokes.
60s or whatever it was. Yeah. I mean, he was like, he had been a policeman like 50 years
Oh
and he retired
man.
from DEA and became a policeman and then a TFO again to DEA. I was like, totally. He goes, yeah, when I came on, if they wanted you to call the station, the water tower had a light that would light up bright red. And that means you went to a call box and called the police station. They'd give you the call you had to go
Wow.
to.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're talking,
How times have changed, man.
how times have changed. Look at us now, right?
Yeah.
So when I got the phone call, I'm in the sheriff's office. He's like, hey, 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever, we got an academy class, January of 98. You get swore in like December of 97. Back then, you would go to the ASAC or the DO office, district office, and
Mhm.
you swear in before you go to the academy. So I go to Tampa no cameras, no picture, no, you just
Yeah,
show up.
it was just unheard of.
I
Yeah.
was like, that would have been nice to have that photo, right? You get to
Yeah.
swear
Now
in, but
everybody's snapping photos and videos on their phones and
we didn't
posting on
have
social
that.
media.
Yeah, so here I am, I swear in, and I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm shipped off, and I'm going to Quantico. In Quantico, at the time, we were with the FBI, so we had like FBI floor, DEA floor, FBI floor, DEA floor. It's like 8 or 9 stories to the dorm and the main. I don't know if you've been to the FBI Academy. When you go to
Yeah.
the FBI, you walk in the front, and then they have a tower with all the rooms for agents. And you go back, you can go upstairs and you go to the commissary and restaurant and all that stuff, the cafeteria.
Hmm.
You go around the corner. They have a big room. They used to have a uh, standalone TV, the kind of big box TV that's like 5 foot tall by like 4 foot wide
A
that you could roll
thousand
around.
pounds.
And that's where everyone would go to watch Friends because this was the era of Friends. So every Wednesday or Thursday night, you'd have 300 bats, basic agent trainee, FBI and DEA watching Friends. Like you'd have 300 of them in this room around this TV, right?
Yeah.
So, and with DEA, back then it was all black fatigues, were very paramilitary, just hardcore. We couldn't use the elevators. We were there for 5 months. For 4 months, you couldn't use the elevators. So we had to go up and down. I was on the seventh
Mm.
floor, I believe, sixth or
Mm.
seventh floor. So you had to go up and down stairs. And I was in great shape. I lost like 30 pounds
I
in
would
the
imagine so doing that.
Everyone did. And I was eating
Yeah.
like crazy. You go to the cafeteria, they had so much food, but you didn't have time to eat it. Like you had like
Yeah.
15 minutes. And so you'd go there and eat and then run to your next class, and then you're tired because you get up at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning and you're running and
Yeah.
exercising. So you're sitting in class falling asleep. If you get caught sleeping, then you have to write memos. We had, same thing,
Yeah.
for people
Yeah.
that don't know how the Fed system works, now it's a little bit softer, nice little polo shirts and color matching,
Exactly.
cream colored, 511s.
No
It's a,
harsh language or raising voices.
yeah, don't swear, don't do this, yeah, well, we didn't have that back then. So, upon graduating, I get stationed in Des Moines, Iowa. My family was in Minnesota at the time, so I said, that's a 4 or 5 hour drive. I'll go to St. Louis Division. I'll work in Des Moines, Iowa. It's a small office. A year before I got there, it was a two-man office. Two-man office. They had
Wow.
two senior guys that were kind of like did all their fun and kind of wanted to chill out,
Yeah.
family and whatever in Iowa. But with the scourge of meth, all the methamphetamine production that was ramping up. This is before Mexican methamphetamine. It was more of the local guy kind of making meth, and then it turned into local guys networking with chefs or cooks from the
Hmm.
West Coast and from the South. They would come up, and I hadn't really seen a lot of methamphetamine. I saw it one time with a guy I had gotten a chase with and got in a fight with and almost got indicted because he was saying I abused him and so forth. But luckily there were witnesses that viewed it and they provided testimony and cleared me. I was absolutely cleared. And I had found on him this little bag and had a wet kind of powder. And I'm like, what the hell is this? It was meth.
Yeah.
Biker gangs were using that stuff, but you didn't
Right.
see it really outside of those circles that much back then,
Right.
in the 90s. So, well, when I get to Des Moines, they were running out hundreds and hundreds of labs a year, and DEA was funding the cleanups for everything. Now, Senator Grassley, he's still there, very long time serving senator, very powerful senator. And he said, hey, we need to bring the DEA office from a two-man office, and we need to ramp it up. So when I got there, I was in the big push, and we ended up having, it was like, before it was all said and done with what's called a RET team and supplemental agents, we had like 35 agents there. That's how bad
Oh,
the problem
wow. That
was.
boomed.
It total boom, right? The rec team was handling all kinds of stuff, west of the Mississippi as well. But their first deployment was on my wiretaps. In 2000, the summer of 2000, we're doing a Mexican organization.
Let me
That was
pause you real quick on and right there, we'll come right back to that. But just for the benefit of the listeners here, we're talking about meth. And it's not like the meth you see today where it's coming across the southern, coming across all of our borders, produced elsewhere, and smuggled in like you see today. Back in the time frame we're talking about right now, and you correct me if I'm wrong, when you say labs and cooking and chefs, these were individuals that would take the precursors, that would take all the ingredients, and they would manufacture the methamphetamine themselves, whether it be in their kitchen or their bathtub or a hotel or the trunk of their car.
Mhm.
That's kind of what you're talking about right there. It's like this mega boom in the Midwest, especially, of all these different individuals and networks producing it like that. Am I on the same page with you?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. All right.
And that's why when you go to the store at a Walgreens or a CVS and you try to get your pseudoephedrine for your nasal passages because you have allergies, you have to give them a driver's license and you have to sign a book because what these guys would do is they would go in and say, "How many cases of pseudoephedrine do you have?" I'm like, cases? Yeah, I want to buy everything you got. And they would go in, they would buy cases, a dozen, 2 dozen cases of the pseudoephedrine, take it, and they have the blister packs and they would separate that stuff. They do a whole stripping process. They would get lithium from batteries and they would mix it all up and they would cook it. Sometimes it might be in a little Coke bottle, some with a chemical
Yeah.
process. Sometimes it would be in a bathtub. Sometimes, there were fires, people were dying. The fumes from this stuff was so caustic it could kill you in a matter of seconds. Some of these guys would pass out and then die in the trailer. We're going to all these different labs that were homegrown labs from these people that were out trying to use the meth, right? And they said, we can produce our own stuff. And then you see, obviously, Breaking Bad and all these other kinds of
Right.
TV shows that The Wire and so forth that kind of came out of that. But what we kind of went from the local cookers to more of a regional cooker to all of a sudden we started getting the Mexican cartel said, wow, this is really taking off. These people are buying this stuff. Cocaine's great, but we could probably start working this methamphetamine. And we had, the Ochoa brothers were big. It's a big Mexican organization that was operating in northern Mexico, and they would ship through California to the Midwest. And so, where's a great hub without being compromised in a big city? Des Moines, Iowa was an excellent place to serve St. Louis and Chicago. And we would have drugs would be coming from Mexico by the kilos into Riverside County. They would do a seizure in Riverside County off wiretaps or whatever it might be. They would fly on the aircraft. They would take the bad guys' cars, the bad guys, they'd get them to cooperate. Sometimes they wouldn't cooperate, and we just would take the cars, put under covers, and we would fly the planes, fly the cars, the bad guys, the dope, and then do a controlled delivery wherever that might be in the Midwest within our range. So, I mean, we're talking sophisticated operations that, you're not just pulling a car up and delivering a pound or a kilo of this stuff. We would have 40, 50, 60, 100 kilos of methamphetamine, and we would have to do a controlled delivery with it. And that takes a lot of know-how and a lot of logistics support to happen. And we did it. We were doing it all the time. I
I
mean,
would imagine. Yeah.
all the time. And that was me as a young agent cutting my teeth and how to do these kinds of operations, cold convoys across the US where you'd follow in these big trucks full of dope that were coming across, implementing and integrating with a team for a while, then peeling off, giving it to the next team, air support, the whole thing across the whole country. So this is what I wanted to do, and this is what I ended up getting to do. But the other side of it was, yeah, we're doing all these big cases and all this other cool stuff. I remember one time, I think it was 15 kilos of crack. It's like 30
Mm.
some pounds of crack cocaine we
Ooh.
seized. I
Yeah.
mean,
That's
that's a
significant.
that's a lot of crack.
You're
I mean,
right.
people maybe they're used to big numbers, but we're talking to make 35 pounds or 30 some pounds of crack cocaine, it's a ton of kilos. I mean, it's a lot of
Right.
kilos to make that, right? And we
Right.
seized a guy that was running it. I think he was running it from somewhere in California out to, it wasn't Chicago, it was somewhere near Chicago where they're going to stage it and then obviously have runners, bring it into the the suppliers or whatever, that local suppliers for Chicago. And I remember this guy said, I'll cooperate, right? So he goes, I got to meet this guy in a parking lot and he's going to do whatever. And so we leg cuffed him to the brake pedal of this car. We
That's a good
disabled.
idea.
So he's sitting in the car, leg shackled, and he's waiting for this guy to come, right? And we have all our UC cars in place and air wings rolling. And so the bad guy shows up, and this guy, the car's disabled. He's like, "Come over here." And he's like, "No, you got to come to me." And we had parked him like in the middle of the parking lot where there's no one, right? But we could see really well, and no one was around, because we're so far
Hmm.
lower. This guy's like, "What the freak are you doing out there? Come over here." No, you come to me. I'm whatever. All right, whatever, dude. So he pulls up. We take it down. The guy's ramming the cars. We don't kill him. We don't shoot him. We want to try to get him to cooperate, which he did flip. We ended up doing some control deliveries. But these were the cases that I had dreamed about doing. Little did I know it was the tip of the iceberg of what DEA was involved with. But what a great place. And then administratively, I was learning how to do all the paperwork for evidence. I was the evidence technician, which was a total
Yeah.
pain in the ass. But when
Yeah.
you're handling evidence and you need to know how to do it and you have to understand how to log it and how to track it, keep it organized, all those things. I was a DCEP coordinator with marijuana, eradication. I was doing, I think it was like the health and aid kind of thing where you have to have all the medical requirements for the office. You have to keep all the logs and you have to
Hmm.
have, the CPR training. It was like one of those kind of like duties that you get, right? So I had
Right.
like 15 of those duties, like all kinds of stuff, right? So I learned how to do all the work in a DEA office that I never would have had if I was in a division. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of working in a small office.
It
So,
sounds like you're building that fantastic foundation that you're going to need as you progress in your career
right.
to what we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this. Was it at this point or rough time frame in your career where you were involved in an auto accident? Was this in the same ballpark time-wise?
Yeah. So the last wiretaps that I had done were in 2000, summer of 2000. And these wiretaps were hardline telephones, like cords in the wall, and
Mm,
beepers, pagers,
mm.
back when we had pagers. So I had
Right.
like five pagers that were clone pagers. You remember these, I'm sure. You
Oh,
got to
for
remember these.
sure.
The bad guy's pager would go off, my pager would go off the same information. And I had like five of them, and then I had hard lines. So that's the era we were in, right? We didn't have cell
Yeah.
phones. So that was in 2000. So the next year, I was returning from a wedding in Minnesota, going to Iowa, and I was struck. My brother was driving the car. We're on Highway 80, no, 65 or something, coming south from Minneapolis to Des Moines. And this guy was going 100 plus. I saw the
Oh
car. I told
man.
my brother, but there was nothing we could do. The car actually braked, kind of fishtailed, and then almost like a pit of a policeman on a bad guy's car, he hit
Hmm.
on the corner, and that set the car on its side five times, then end over end two times. And I had my seatbelt on. So when the roof collapsed, I couldn't go forward, couldn't go back. It just went like this, right?
Oh.
So it compressed, fractured like all the facets on the back of your neck. You have like almost like a pyramid thing coming out the back of your neck. It's kind of like this, right? They're
Hmm.
called facets. And it crushed them all. It's just like
Oh.
three, four, five, and six were all crushed. The disc in between five and six was destroyed. Yeah, I had a spinal cord injury. I remember I'm in the car upside down. I have the seatbelt on. I can't breathe. My brother's like, dude, get out of the car. And I'm like, I got nothing. I can't move my arms. I can't. I knew I was screwed. I knew. I was like, man, I'm in deep shit here because I
You were
cannot
conscious that whole time and
the whole time,
evaluating.
never
Oh
lost,
my
never
gosh.
lost consciousness. And he got down, and when he looked in the car, his eyes got this wide. He's like, oh, because my neck, I'm upside down, my neck was facing back. my body was facing forward. He could see, my neck was twisted. And I was like, man, you gotta undo the seatbelt, dude. I cannot breathe. And he's like, dude, I don't want to do that. You might die. I said, I'm gonna die. I can't breathe. I could not breathe. It was so much pressure, I was so big and all that dead weight on my chest. It was just every time I took a breath out, it was like it would go,
Oh
it's
man.
horrible, right?
Yeah.
So he came in and he's like, "You ready?" I said, "Just, do it, bro." He hits it, and I just like a sack of potatoes on the roof of the car. But I could breathe. I was like, "Oh my
Oh,
God,
thank
breathe."
goodness.
Right? Yeah, but I'm my left arm. I could move a little bit. It kind of like flopped it. That's it. That's all I had. Everything else was totally because my spinal cord had been bent and was stuck like this.
Oh
And so
man.
everything on the inside was slowly dying because there was no blood getting to the inner side of the spinal cord. So luckily for me, a doctor had rolled up and he had just got done doing training for the paramedics and the firemen. Like literally just did like an emergency medicine training for them. And he crawls in and he's looking at me like kind of assessing it. And I could see he was like, this is not good. I had been to, as a cop, hundreds of
Sure.
these crashes and people in paralyzed states and dead and so forth. And I knew I was like, this might not be good for me, right? And
Hmm.
he's like, he said, "Can you move at all?" I said, "I can't. No. I mean, maybe a little." He goes, "Don't move, don't move. Can you move?" I said, "Maybe a little bit with the left arm, but everything else I can't feel anything. Can't feel anything." And he's like, "I got to straighten your neck out." Because he knew the time frame, because he'd just been with these firemen.
Yeah.
And he knew, he's like, 5, 6 minutes, whatever it is. He goes, if he has a chance to walk, we got to do it now, but it might kill you. And I'm like, dude, I don't care. Because how am I going to live? It's a tough
Right.
decision, but I'm like, it's worth it. So he gets behind me, he goes, "You ready?" I'm like, "Do it, bro." And he straightened it out and he kind of straightened it, pulled it, but not a lot, but enough. And all of a sudden, I just felt this electricity go through my whole body. It literally shot from my head through my legs, out my toes. And I'm like, holy shit, I felt something. He goes, "Do not move." And he stayed in the car. Gas is pouring out, the whole thing, right? And I go, "Dude, I can feel something." I couldn't feel like you feel, but like when your arm is asleep and you can't feel it at all,
Hmm.
but something's there. That's kind of what it felt like. My whole
Oh
fucking,
man.
it was bad.
Yeah.
So when the electricity went through me, it didn't really come back. I just felt something a little different, right? Luckily for me, all that, the spinal cord had been curved and bent. When he straightened me, that blood flow or whatever it was, I'm not a medical doctor, right?
Right.
Whatever it was allowed to kind of start flowing again. So whatever died stopped at that kind of. And then because the spinal, unfortunately, spinal tissue, I guess, or the fabric of the spinal cord or whatever it is that you would call it, it doesn't regenerate, right? It's not like when you cut your hand, it's going to regenerate, you get a scab over it, and then all of a sudden you're good as new. It doesn't work that way with the spinal cord. So they get me out and it took like 10 or 11 of them. It was in the median, right? So even though it wasn't raining, it's just full of water and shit and whatever, in the median.
Right.
They're up to their knees trying to get me out and like dead weights, 275 or whatever. They're all like trying to get me to the helo. They put me in it, and I remember when it took off, when you're riding on skids, the body of the helicopter goes up, and then your legs come up after. And I
Hmm.
just remember that feeling when I'm in, and the nurse is looking at me going, "Oh, we're gonna take care of you. You're gonna be all right." And then I felt the helicopter rise, and then the release of the skids. It totally brought me back like I was going to jump out the helo backwards, like on a rope, right?
Oh
Like
man.
I'm going to ride on the skids to a building. I was totally feeling that kind of thing, and I passed out. I was like freaking out, man.
Oh
I
man.
I didn't even wake up till we got to the ER, and they were going to cut a belt my buddy had given me this Ranger belt and they were going to cut it. I'm like, don't you cut that freaking belt. Doctor, really? You know, he opens the belt up and he's like, all right, we won't cut it, kid. And then they cut my pants and everything around it. Like, save the belt for me. They didn't cut the
Yeah,
ring.
a
So
memento.
a memento, right? So then, they can't operate on you because I had so much swelling in my spinal cord. They can't operate right away. They had to actually put me on all this medication, bring the swelling down, stretch me out, put me in traction, and all this stuff, right? Because I have all these bone fragments in there that
Man,
can damage the spinal cord too, right? So,
yeah,
and this is 2001. They didn't have the same. They had MRIs and all that, but it wasn't the same as it is now. The stuff we have now is like space age, right? It just wasn't at that level. What is it now? 30 years ago. So I remember they came in, they said, we have to put some counterweights uh, into your skull. We have to drill into your skull with this bracket and then put a pulley system and stretch and put you in traction. And I'm like, I'm just laying there paralyzed,
yeah,
I'm like, really? And so they're like,
right.
yeah. And they just came in, they kind of put some shots to numb it and then
For
drilling in my head.
real,
It's
you
like
were
literally,
conscious and awake while they're
oh
doing that.
yeah, dude.
Wow.
Oh yeah. And I passed out somewhere in there. I
Oh,
was,
yeah.
oh, man, I was so messed up, But I'm sitting there. So they had this pulley system. So my head, I'm laying down, right? So I'm laying down like this, and the pulley system goes like this, and your head. So it's pulling your body and head kind of away from the body, right?
Sure.
To provide that space so that the bone, and I don't know how they do it exactly, but I think they brought in like an X-ray guy and all that, and they're taking pictures to make sure it's okay. And then I stayed like that for like, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 days while they're juicing me with all this medication.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is sucks. It sucked, man. I
Oh
mean,
my
you can't
gosh.
drink, you
Yeah.
can't eat, and so I go into a surgery. When I came out of the surgery, I'm in the intensive care, but like a special unit of the intensive care. And this nurse, this dude, initially, they switched off, was sitting in front of me. And he was like literally like 2 feet away from me, like looking at me like this, just staring at me, like leaning forward, like watching me. And I'm like, what's this dude doing? Like,
Right.
I'm hooked. I guess I was in such bad shape. They had a nurse sitting with me all the time. Like
To
if they
monitor
saw
you. I
something,
guess real time monitor you.
I guess, but I was hooked up to
Wow.
the equipment. I don't know, but I had someone
Yeah.
with me for like the first 24 hours or 30 hours or something. Someone was there and they kept switching off. But there's this one guy, a young guy. He's in the like a nurse uniform, like a blue operating scrubs kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, I have to drink. I haven't had anything to drink in like 4 or 5 days. They're just giving me IVs. And he goes, can't give you a drink, man. And I'm like, bro, I need something. He gives me this little sponge lollipop that has a little bit of moisture in it. And I'm sucking on that. And I'm like, it was bad. And I use the
Oh
illustration of the
man.
book Clockwork Orange. If you've ever seen
Oh yeah. Yeah.
the movie version of that, where they have the guy strapped to a chair and his eyes are open, and they have
Mm-hmm.
it's holding his eyes open, and he's just sitting there like, and they're putting drops in his
Right.
eyes to keep the moisture. That's what I felt like. And I was like, I cannot live like this.
That just
There's
sounds
no
absolutely
way.
miserable.
It was bad. I really didn't. I actually planned in my mind. I was at that time, I was 31 years old, prime physical condition of my life. 31 is the prime for a man to be physically active in their life. That's the optimal strength, speed, everything. 31 years old for most things, maybe not for sprinter or certain sports, but overall conditioning of a man, 30, 31
Mm-hmm.
years old is like an optimal strength plus response plus blah, blah, blah. That's what the doctor told me. So I was planning, like, they're like, we don't know what's going to happen with you, dude. You might be paralyzed the rest of your life. I have to wait and see, have a lot of swelling, have a spinal cord injury, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get out of this hospital as soon as I can. I'll be paralyzed, right? But I'm going to be in a wheelchair with one of those little straw things that can move myself around. So when I go home, I'm going to be by a pool and I'm going to ask my wife to go get me a lemonade. And when she does, I'm going to drive this right over the freaking into the pool. So I drown.
Man,
And I was strapped to this. So it's going to be heavy as hell, right? And I'm going to just run this thing into the pool. Not because I didn't want to live per se, but I couldn't. It's to
that's got to be
describe
overwhelming.
it. And when I see someone that is paralyzed, it's like I think over time you adapt to that feeling. It's an exhaustive kind of like hopelessness. And I think over time you adapt to that. But I didn't know if I could do it, man.
This episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast is sponsored by Graphic Options. When it comes to custom screen printing, embroidery, and promotional gear, Brenda and her team are the real deal. I trust them with everything, whether it's a hat for my consulting business, a shirt for my podcast, or a large order of both. They've never let me down. They don't treat you like just another order. They listen, they care, and they make sure you walk away with something you're proud to put your name on. You have the right to great service and quality, and that's exactly what you'll get at Graphic Options. Visit graphicoptionsonline.com. That's graphicoptionsonline.com, and let them know the Right to Remain Silent podcast sent you.
This was the early stages, right? And it wasn't like waist down, it was neck down. We're talking Superman paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
And he had gone through his equestrian ride gone bad at the same time. And I remember watching,
Oh,
dude, Christopher Reeve. I'm speaking
right.
of the Reeve, famous actor. But then I said, you know what's going to happen to me? I remember sitting in the bed, like kind of laughing. I go, you know what's going to happen? With that straw, I'm going to be like, go, baby. And I'm going to make a run for it. I'm going to hit the lip of that pool and just get frozen there like this. And I'm going to be like, no, I'm not going to make it in the water. That's what's going to happen.
Um,
That's, and I kind of laughed and kind of brought me back. Like, okay,
right,
I have two
right.
decisions here. I can fight for my life or I can just give up, right? And I said, I'm gonna freaking do this. I'm gonna fight whatever I have to do to get back on my feet for my family, for my job, for all the things I want to do. I'm 31 years old. If I have a shot, I'm gonna take every opportunity to do. And that's exactly what I did. And so after a few weeks, I was sitting up in the wheelchair. The first time I sat up in the wheelchair, I passed out. My body could not regulate blood to my brain because I've been laying down for so long. And you go through these crazy tests where they're like, can you feel what's going on? Can you feel this? Can you feel that? I couldn't feel shit, you know? Like,
Man.
here, they'll give you like a cell phone. Can you feel that? Couldn't feel anything. I couldn't even hold it. My hands are on a table like this. And I'm like, it's like Gumby. Everything was like Gumby, right?
Yeah.
First time I stood up, they had to hold me and I'm walking, I'm doing this. Like it's just a total train wreck. But I could stand and I could move. So I was like, you know what? Let me build on this. I went from like, warming up on a bench with 300 to I couldn't even open a chip bag. I couldn't even open like a little potato chip bag. I couldn't do it. I couldn't hold a pencil. Couldn't do anything. Couldn't do anything, right? So the hospital is great. I remember my first real rehab session where I could actually get up, literally getting off the table, like trying to walk a few steps. I was in so much pain. They just put me back on the table and I lay there the rest of that was just like 3 minutes of exercise, just getting up and standing up and taking a step or two. And then that was all I could do. Literally, that's all I could do. And of course, my arms, I'm like flopping around. I couldn't even use my arms initially. It took a lot of work with these little rubber bands, the colored bands you see like in the
Yeah.
gym,
Yeah.
different colors and different things. So that's how I recovered. I was taking these bands and I'm working them And then you graduate. Then I started with weights. Then I started doing pull-ups. I started doing push-ups. And over the next year, DEA was great to me, really good. I don't know if they'd do this today. I hope they would. People were donating time. I had never used sick time, so I exhausted all my sick time. Then they had a leave program. People were donating a week here, half a week, 2 weeks. Got people were great, right? So after a year, I kind of came back and I remember walking into the office and I'm like, oh, I mean, I could barely move. And my boss is looking at me, he goes, how you feeling? I was like, great. He goes, yeah, you're a good liar. Have a seat here. I want you to read whatever manual all day long. Just make sure you're covering that. I need to know and brief me on whatever. It was bullshit, right? He just
Right.
took care of me. I just sat.
Yep, doing the right thing.
He just took care of me, right? And like if he wanted me to do something, I would call. I could do things like that, right? Like, hey, call this guy and get this, get the dates, do whatever. And I was doing like just peanut work, right? So then I remember we went out to do a search warrant, and I went out, and this was probably 6 months when I was back, and we jump out of our cars and we're going, and the gate's open. I open the gate, and I go to pull my gun. I couldn't get it out of the holster. Couldn't get
Mm.
it out of the holster, man. I was like my wrist wouldn't. And my old partner Corey, he was a TFO at the time. Later became an agent. He just kind of looked at me. He's like, "Hey, bro, just yeah, just work the perimeter." I was so messed up, man. I couldn't get
Uh,
the gun out, and I was
yeah.
like, "Ugh, "That's not good. I'm gonna get someone
Mm.
killed out here." But they kept me way on the outside.
Right.
But I had no business going back. But I did, and I just kept working out, and eventually, I didn't get back where I was by any means. I was an avid martial artist. I was just running and doing everything and tournament fighting previously and all that stuff, and then all that kind of stopped. But I was able to fully operate, and then I eventually was in the gym. I'm bench pressing, I'm lifting. I mean, I'm not doing world record stuff, but I'm doing great. I'm
But
actually
you're
going
there
2
doing it.
or 3 mile runs. Yeah, I was totally back on track, even though I had a lot of pain and a lot of numbness and things like that. But luckily, I still can't feel my arm. I can't feel the outside of my arm. Can't feel it.
Oh
And I
man.
lost my bicep because there's no connectivity. However, I can totally feel the inside of my hand. And, that's pretty important, right? So
Right,
I can totally feel
exactly.
that. So, at the range, I'm good. I can move everything. I'm really good. So as I recovered, I came back to work. I was working cases. I started seeing, all these foreign offices, these guys that were doing overseas work. And in DEA, we always say, you have to have a rabbi, right? You got to have a rabbi. And they're like, a rabbi? What, I'm a young kid, right? I'm like, what's a rabbi? They're like, a guy that's going to advocate for you and get you jobs. If you don't have a rabbi, you're not getting a job. You could be the best guy in the world, but if you don't have the end, the
You
rabbi's got to
gotta,
get
yep, you gotta have that connect.
you got to have the connect. DEA, they call it a rabbi. I don't think they use that term as much anymore, but at the time they used rabbi all the time. Who's your rabbi? What's your rabbi? And it was a big joke, right? So my boss knew people, made some phone calls. He told him this kid's really dedicated. He could have retired. He didn't. He came back. He fought through paralysis and he returned and he wants to do an overseas tour. This is for a spot in Guatemala. Well, these spots were 75, 100 people put in for these spots. One spot might have
Yeah, for
75,
one vacancy, right?
one vacancy, right? So here I am putting in some kid from Iowa, and I got it. I got it. I think someone was like, yeah, this kid, you know what? This kid actually wants it really bad, enough to return from what he went through.
Can I pause you just real
Yeah.
quick? I want to address your accident and your recovery. Man, that is clearly some serious stuff that you went through. And I just want to like highlight like that took perseverance, like inner drive. So not only were you challenged physically with trying to regain everything, but like you were describing, you're fighting that mental battle as well. There's like multiple internal struggles, it sounds like, that go on in that scenario you had. So kudos to you for fighting so hard to come back, like that in itself is a positive. I don't like to use the word story. That is a positive incident. So, man, I'm so glad that you didn't give up. You didn't drive that chair into a pool, and you did what you did. So, good work on that. I just think it's very important to acknowledge that.
No, I appreciate it. And, I've talked to academy classes, I've talked to youth groups, I've talked to a variety of people. And that's one of the biggest things when I speak to them is let's, a lot of this stuff and everyone in every profession goes through tough times, right? And your responses, it's so hard to get your responses on track. No one's perfect. We all struggle with it. And to say that you don't now in optimal performing to kind of organizations, whether it be in business or medicine or law enforcement, when you're doing things that are highly stressful, highly dangerous, a lot depending on it, whether you're a neurosurgeon or you're a police officer, whatever it be, stress might be framed differently, but it's still heavy, heavy stress. And when you go through this stuff, it always, in my view, you might falter, you might get depressed, you might do whatever it is that you're doing. And a lot of guys have PTSD and so forth, and gals have PTSD and things like that. But I think I personally, I believe almost everyone has some level of PTSD in their life. They do.
I
Anyone
think
who's
that's fair to
trauma,
say.
everyone goes through something like this. This is not something that just cops go through. Physicians go through. Think about a physician that's handling cancer patients that are dying on them, right? Do you don't think that creates a level of post-traumatic stress for them? I mean, we're talking, some of the physicians might lose a dozen, 2 dozen patients a year.
Yeah,
If they've got 100 patients, depending on what kind of cancer they're treating and things like that. So,
very valid point.
being able to persevere through that mental anguish, because a part of them is always going to say in some little corner of their mind, even though it has no validity, maybe I could have done something else. And I think a lot of policemen do that as well, a lot of firemen, a lot of paramedics. Maybe if I had done a little bit more. We've all had that. I can't tell you how many times I've woken up at night and I'm thinking about someone that I saw die or something that I maybe I could have done differently. And whether it's an informant that I lost, and I lost several of them, unfortunately, not because I did anything wrong, because they didn't listen to me, right? You have an informant doesn't listen. Next thing you know, you're talking to his wife. I had one, she was overseas, 7 months pregnant with 3 kids, begging for a US visa because her husband had been killed because he was working with me. But I told him, don't ever bring this phone with you. Don't ever do it. And it has to stay in this hidden location. And when you retrieve it, you have to go through a procedure to get the phone. And what did he do? He took it with him along with another phone. He went, they fucking searched everyone. They found the numbers. They said, why are you calling the city? And they tortured him. He gave it up. They chopped him up. Next thing you know, dumped the body in a ditch, and his wife's begging for help. So could I have done anything else? I preached to him 100 times. We're dealing in a business, as many professions are, we don't have full control of everything, right?
Right.
So looking back on this injury and how I overcame it and what my goals were, there were so many times. I told you I couldn't open a chip bag. I remember
Yeah.
when I was home, I went to open a loaf of bread and I couldn't get the little twist tie off the bread package. And I collapsed on the floor. I couldn't even fucking get up. I mean, I had no wrist control. So I couldn't even get up. I'm trying to use my arms, and I couldn't even get off the fucking floor. I had to crawl over to the stairs that were by the kitchen and kind of try to get up on it, push my legs to get up on to stand up again. So, I mean, I was like in tears, like going, how am I gonna do this? What am I gonna do at 31 years old with kids and a wife and all, bills and all this
Right.
stuff? But it was a lot more than that. I had things I wanted to do. And so I framed it for me. And just talking about this is, and anyone could do the same thing. And this is something that I really stand on the soapbox about is no matter how bad it gets, try to always frame that it's going to be better. 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 And you have to not give up. So many people give up. And when you give up, that is the end, right? So depends on, where you are in your life and all these different factors and what you're doing. But it's critical that if you want to do something better than you've done before, if you want to come back from a traumatic event, whether you're having emotional difficulties, whatever it is, number one, you have to get help. Number two, you have to have the mindset. You're always going to fall back sometimes and be like, oh, woe is me. Jump back on it, right? It's like people trying to quit smoking. They have a cigarette. Oh, fuck. I just blew it. And they're like, fuck it. I'm just going to keep smoking for no, get back on it, right?
Yeah.
Always get back on track. So, and that was my mindset. I'm like, I'm going to fulfill what I want to do in my life. And fortunately, I did. And then this is just kind of the beginning of the story in a sense. I don't want to take too much time, but
Oh no, take all the time.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I go to
that
Guatemala, and this is 2003. After a year of language school, I get down to Guatemala, and I'm in, the jungle, riding in helos, doing jungle mission, chasing narcos after being paralyzed just 3 years prior. So, I mean,
that just
I
shows what
went,
perseverance and
yeah,
determination can do. You got,
yeah,
it sounds like you got into DEA to do big things.
yeah,
And although you had that major life altering event, you did not let that stop you.
right.
So,
And it was very rewarding. I remember we were doing what's called Jacob's Ladder. We would come in Chinook, and the back of the Chinook would go down, and we'd throw a ladder out, and you crawl down the ladder on the side of the mountain, so that the helicopter will come on, and it'll hover over a portion of the cliff or the mountain or whatever you're at, and you go down the ladder. You go do your operation. Helo takes off. You do an extract. You come back. You go back up the ladder if they can't land, depending on the terrain. So we're doing this, and I have my M16 or M4, and I sling it. I'm going down, and I don't have good strength in my right arm at this time, and I'm like, "Fuck." I'm going down the ladder. We go out, do our mission. We come back. I'm climbing up the ladder into the helo, and no one. I didn't even tell anyone. Like no one really knew how damaged I had been, how
yeah,
injured I had been. I knew I was weak. I was still able to do the mission, but I could feel the weakness. And I was like in the gym, like the next weeks, working out, working out, working out, going out and training these guys. I was training Guatemalan Special Forces. They have what's called the Cayman, which is like their Navy SEALs. And they
mhm,
also have the I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but they have like basically their version of the Rangers SF, right?
sure.
So these guys, we're out training these guys in the jungles. How am I going to train these guys if I can't even do a push-up, right? So I was like really determined to go out there, and it was hard, man, because I was pretty still. I was hurting. I'm popping a lot of Advil and a lot of Tylenol, but it was great, and I did it, and we were just seizing ton loads of cocaine at that time. The planes were coming from South America. They'd fly into Guatemala, to northern Guatemala, and they had what's called the graveyard, and the planes would control crash land with 2 tons of coke in it in a field, and then they would load it off, and then the Mexican cartels heavy with the Zetas back then, which were made up of a lot of special forces, Guatemalans, Central American and Guatemalans and Mexican special forces that kind of betrayed their countries and went to work for the narcos. And then they would pass and get all the cocaine, bring it to Mexico, and then transit it to the United States. So we're trying to interrupt that.
Were those planes like, would they crash them and just leave those planes?
Crash and leave them, crash and burn them. So you might have a DC-9 come in with 2 tons, and they would control crashing in a field. And we're talking dangerous stuff for these pilots, right? I mean,
Yeah.
your control crashing DC-9 in a field, and you can Google it
Right.
too. Put Guatemala airplane graveyard, narco graveyard, and stuff like that, and you'll see all these planes. You'll see wreckage everywhere. So planes would come in, they would crash land. Sometimes they would blow up and burn. The pilots would die. We'd just come in and they'd be dead. Nothing you could do. And then sometimes they would successfully, land the aircraft, get out, and then the cartel members would come and collect the dope, and then they would blow up and torch the aircraft, and then just get another one because they're making, you
Sure.
know, they're making 40, $50 million on the load, and they have to pay maybe $1 million for an old aircraft. They're like, just cost of doing business.
Yeah, heck yeah. Let me ask you this. Working domestically within the United States as opposed to working internationally outside in various countries, there's subtle differences in how you would operate as federal law enforcement, right? Like here in the US, you're out on the streets, you're conducting arrests, you're executing search warrants, you're running the show, you're doing everything. When you're working internationally with law enforcement counterparts in various countries, you kind of have to depend on them, don't you? Is to in order to effectively do your job. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. So yes and no. It depends on what country you're in, right? So in Guatemala, we had what's called an SIU. We had a, unit that was a vetted unit of people we selected. We drug tested, we interviewed background and polygraphed them, and they worked with us every day, right? And we're with them all the time. And we had one of those in Guatemala that I helped stand up. It was one of the first ones in Central America
Hmm.
in Guatemala. And we used them on a bunch of operations. I did a National Geographic special that detailed one of the cases called Titan, Operation Titan. It's a
I
very
was going
long
to ask you about that. Yeah.
Hezbollah
Yeah.
and Colombian, they were interfacing, laundering money. The Hezbollah aspect is the money laundering. They were using Coke money from Colombia, and we would have an undercover. I'll call his name is Frank, even though it's not Frank. He's a friend of mine, and we talk every other day, at least even to this day. And he was doing the undercover. And, we're talking about Colombian cartels and proxies of Iran, right? Hezbollah, Lebanese terrorists, all funneling. And this is 2003, right? This is 2004, 2005, and six. We're just talking a few years after 9/11. So
Yeah.
the topic
Yeah.
of terrorism wasn't something that you just say, come on, really? No, we're
Right.
still clearing rubble, the site in New York, right? And
Right.
3,500 some innocent people had perished that day. So everyone was very much backing, police officers, law enforcement, first responders, so forth. You really could feel the difference compared to now, where it's like, let's audit them and make sure they're doing the right
Right.
thing. They're all scumbags, and you have
Right.
lawyers that will dedicate their careers to now. They don't practice law per se. They're actually just doing YouTubes. And this guy did this, and this guy did this, and there is a place, for some of that. I get it,
Hmm.
but when your whole job has become to let's get law enforcement and just look for the bad in law enforcement, and there does have to be accountability. I'm not knocking that whatsoever, but sometimes when I'm watching some of these videos, it's kind of a stretch. I remember
Oh yeah.
I was watching one morning, one lawyer. I won't say who he is, but he was describing an event. But how he was describing it, talking about the police officer and how he was couching the language about the police officer and what he thinks should happen to the police officer and what people should do. It was, in my view, and I put this in the email to him. I actually emailed him. I never do that. He had no clue who I was or what I'd done or anything, and he wrote me a very lengthy response, and I'll kind of get into that. And I said, you're an officer of the court. You need to use a little bit of caution when you're describing maybe what should happen to an officer, when you're promulgating maybe a notion of not violence, but potential harm. Or you're an officer of the court. You're a lawyer. You're barred, in whatever state he was in. He's a bar member or so forth. I said, you use a little caution. I think you're a little over aggressive. Oh my God, this guy wrote me back. I was a
Wow.
police officer. I know more than you, I'm sure. And when I was a policeman, he had no clue who he just thought I was just some Yahoo,
Right.
right? He probably gets a million of them. But he wrote this long, 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 just denigrating me and telling me I don't know what I'm doing and he's an expert and blah blah. And I look him up and he has a law practice that doesn't even have an office and whatever. I'm like, dude, maybe he's a great guy. I don't know the guy from Adam. All I know is he was pushing the limits of what I thought I'm looking at it going, man, you get yourself jammed up with this stuff, dude. Not all this
Right.
police officer in this case, whatever, I won't even get into it. Uh, Maybe he could have done better, but in my view, he really didn't do anything really, really wrong per se. And this guy was talking about his tattoos and all this extraneous stuff that is like, you're a lawyer, dude.
Right.
Come on, pick a
Right.
case that is worth fighting. You know what I
Focus
mean?
your efforts elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have this in 2004 and five when I was working in Guatemala in these cases. We had stand up. You're a law enforcement officer.
Right.
We want
Let's
to salute
acknowledge
you.
you and appreciate you.
Yeah, and it was a great time to be a cop. I wasn't really into that. I just didn't like getting up, and I just felt weird, like many of us
Yeah.
do. And like the military guys don't like to do that either, right? We just didn't want to do that. So it was a great time. So we had all the support. This was one of the first cases where we had Hezbollah and Colombian traffickers, and we had, some of these meetings. We had bodyguards for the Colombians that had body armor underneath their suits with rifles standing in
Hmm.
front of the hotel. And I told Frank, I actually told him one day when he was doing the UC undercover in this place, I said, listen, if it goes bad, when we come in, you got to get on the floor because we're going to kill everything that's standing. I told him, I said, get on the fucking ground. He's like, gotcha. I'll be kissing the floor. I
Message
said,
received.
yeah, because if it goes bad with these guys, they got long arms. These guys are Colombian, pistoleros, whatever, and it's going to be bad, right? Thank God that didn't happen. And they have body armor too. So when you're shooting it out with these guys with body armor, you have abdomen and leg shots and head shots, and it's very complicated, especially when you have multiple targets. You're in a foreign country, and we talked about this. What is my role? Well, luckily in Guatemala, I was working with and we had carnets, which were assigned to us, kind of like we have a kind of diplomatic authority in a sense. We are advisors, but depending on what country you're in, that advising level, if it comes to a point where we have Americans and we're doing an operation together, they will let you act in a sense with them and they'll
Okay.
take care of you in some sense.
Sure.
Guatemala's very friendly with the United States. They're not looking to pinch us and throw us
Yeah.
in prison, right? Unless we're doing rogue stuff on our own and no one's help, we weren't doing
Right.
that. They knew everything we were doing. They cleared it at the highest level. We're working with the team. We're all working as a team, and we're doing this together with the government of Guatemala. So it was absolutely fine. But there is a very fine line between, and we'll talk about this when I ended up being in Venezuela later,
Yeah.
between doing your own thing in an overseas post and then doing, things in the United States where you have full constitutional authority.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes complete sense. So you're in Guatemala, you're doing all these things. You've worked Operation Titan. Just for the benefit of the listeners here, like you said, you kind of you built up to this. This is shortly after the time frame of the 2001 terrorist attacks. A couple years later, terrorism is the worldwide focus. It's certainly the American law enforcement focus, and you're seeing in your investigating firsthand these different organizations working together, Hezbollah, different drug cartels. What, as you're investigating, you're seizing money, right? You're seizing large sums of cash from these organizations. What do you do with that cash? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like you walk to the ATM and you're like, hey, I'm just going to deposit this in the ATM and we'll get it later. We're talking millions and millions of dollars of drug proceeds that you guys are investigating and seizing. How is that like physically handled, from the point of seizure until the ultimate destination? Does that
Yeah,
question make sense?
sure, sure, sure. So
Okay.
in this investigation, what they were doing was the organization from Colombia had the contract to launder the money, right? They would launder the money and then give it to Hezbollah, right? They had a system down where they were the Colombians were moving the drugs, they were selling some of the drugs, then the money would come back through different people that were laundering the money, which was, in this case, a U.S. agent working undercover, right? So they come up with a contract to say, can you move, say, 10 million? Okay, you do 10 million. Well, can you do another 10, right? And then at some point, you're reaching a cap to what the US government will allow you to launder, right? And that changes and fluctuates. But the first, say, pickup that we would do would say 2 or 3 million, right? So we have $2 or $3 million that's coming in, and it's coming in with suitcases. So you'll have a suitcase with maybe $500,000 in it, and then you have another suitcase with another $500,000. So you might have 5 or 6, 7 suitcases. So they would typically, sometimes in one case we had, we're out in a parking lot in a multi-level parking garage, and the guy would say, hey, go out, here's the keys to the undercover, here's the keys to this Jeep Cherokee, right? So he would come out, of course, we're monitoring everything. We watch him. He gets in the Jeep Cherokee and he leaves, and then I'll follow behind him. Now, the first time when we're following him, I remember my boss is in another car. He's on the radio. He's like, he's not pulling over. Is he alone in the car? What's going on? He was like kind of excited about what's going on. Is he okay? So finally he pulls over. He jumps out of the car and he does this because the car is wired, right? With audio, maybe a tracker, all this stuff. It's 2005, 6, 7, whatever. They still had some of that technology. These guys had unlimited funds almost, right? To pay for whatever they need to pay for. So he gets out, he's like, whoa, and he takes pictures of the car and the VIN and all that stuff. And then he goes, we're going to take it to an underground area, transfer the bags. Then I had to bring all these bags to the U.S. Embassy, right? So I take the first pickup, like 6, 7 huge suitcases full of cash, because heavy as hell. Each, fill them up with $50, $20 bills, each suitcase, and it's like a 150-pound bag.
Yeah, it's not an envelope with
Yeah.
cash cards or that type of thing. It's
Yeah.
cold hard cash.
It's cash, all bundled up with, some of it had saran wrap, some of it had rubber bands. It's just a mix of all the money that comes in and collates, and then they pick it up and bring it to the launderers, right? So we kept doing this, and I would take these bags to the embassy, lock them in one of the rooms. We'd log it in. Remember my days of evidence training, right? So I was like, oh, I got this, no problem. With the evidence logs, all the tabs, we had the stickers so that you couldn't break the seal, because there's so much money here. And they would say, oh, okay, this is $3.2 million, right, in one pickup, or $2 million, whatever it might be. And I could take 20, 30,000 and say the count was off. No, who's going to complain? We're going to seize this money anyway, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you have access to do a lot of things in these positions, and that's why you're screened so heavily when you're going into it. Because if you have anything in your psychological or polygraph, whatever it is, they're going to see these things. And, the psychologists are really good at spotting issues as well. But in this case, that's not even in my mind. I'm just looking, this is evidence. We got to lock it all up. So we kept doing the undercover 1 week, then 2 weeks would go by, another 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Next thing you know, I got $20 million of cash. It was actually more than $20 million in this room, which is now full of suitcases. And you just can't fly it out like on a Cessna. We have to have DEA aircraft come down. And we had, finally, when we flew it all down, we're going to take down the targets and do everything we have to do. We had, I don't know, 25 suitcases, 18, 25 suitcases full of cash, and we had to load it in 2 separate aircraft. Where the seats were, we're putting them in the seats because we had so much money.
It's amazing, yeah.
Didn't know what to do with it. And so they flew that all to Fort Lauderdale. I stayed behind. Luckily, I did. We got some more phone calls. The target actually was captured in another country, said she had another 3 or 4 suitcases full of cash, jewelry and gold and Rolexes and all that at a hotel in a closet they were holding for her. So I had to go with the vetted guys that vetted Guatemalan police, and I had to go get these suitcases. Well, it could have been set up. We could have been robbed. There's a lot of things. So we had to put together another operation just to go to get these suitcases. And then because she decided she wanted to cooperate, she had family, we had to escort her to the airport so they didn't kill or kidnap the family. because we're dealing with very complex terrorists with Colombian traffickers, right? So if they smell anyone cooperating, they have family, they're going to grab them and hold them, right? So
Yeah.
we had to do all that as well. So then it all culminated with the big seizure and everything came out in the press, and they continued to do their takedowns and arrests around the world. And it was a very, very stunning case of what DEA was capable of. It's called Operation Titan. You can Google it, and you can watch it on Hulu. Actually, you could see there's a show called Drug Lords: The Takedown. It's called Operation Titan, and it kind of chronicles what
Okay.
that case is about. But
Yeah,
that's what I
I
want
would
to do.
second that. That's an interesting. I've heard and read about that specific operation. So for listeners that are interested in something like that, I second what you're saying. Look into that and watch and learn about it.
Yeah, it was a great case to be a part of. I just had a small part of it, but it was a pretty intense part because that's where all the money was coming back.
Yeah.
And so we're dealing with terrorists and Colombian, narcos and stuff like that. And I was like, here I am. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, you're doing what you wanted to do,
Yeah,
getting into DEA. So yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and I had many coworkers and many friends and buddies that have worked internationally, and I've often heard tales, and folks, even guests on the podcast here have referenced it, corruption levels, various levels of corruption, when you're working internationally. And I'm not saying everybody in Guatemala was corrupt that you dealt with, but did you experience any levels of corruption as you worked that assignment over there?
yeah. We had some special police officers that were doing some crazy stuff. They ended up being killed. They were two brothers. I won't say their names, but they were almost like deputized and they were going after these narcos. And what they would do is capture them and torture them, and get
Hmm.
information and so forth. And then later on, the police director actually was brought to a trial in The Hague for like some crimes against humanity thing, and they put him in prison for life in Europe. He was
Wow.
actually European descent, had a passport from a European country, and he was doing the same thing. They were killing and extrajudicial killings, tortures, things like that. So those things were going on as well. And so we had to be very careful to stay away. But we're talking about the police director. But he knew on the other side of the coin that we can't let the agents know we're doing this because then they're going to not want to work with us because they understood that we had boundaries. So even though we knew some of this stuff, we didn't know the full scope.
Right.
Obviously, we work the intelligence side of things as well, not just the enforcement side.
Okay, that makes sense. How long was your assignment there in Guatemala?
Yeah, I was there 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
was there
And
four
you
years.
you worked in additional international offices as well, right?
Yeah.
Venezuela?
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Venezuela. I had come out of Guatemala. I promoted to group supervisor. I went to Chicago, and there we're seizing tens of millions of dollars of Chapo Guzman's money. The Flores twins, Margarito Flores, and things like that. We're hitting all the stash houses. We seized upwards of $30 million or more in a couple of years there. Hundreds and hundreds of kilos of cocaine, heroin, guns, homicide suspects, corrupt policemen. We were doing the gamut of everything. And then after being there for 3 years in 2010, I went to Venezuela. Venezuela is a country attaché in Venezuela. I was working there with a couple agents and a couple admin people. But throughout the course of my 2 years in Venezuela, I was doing a lot of things alone because the agents had one had PCS'd out. He had moved out and went to Washington, D.C. The other one came down to replace him. It was very difficult to get visas because the country of Venezuela had, quote unquote, kicked DEA out of the country. So they were doing it all under the table. It was kind of like a vice of vice.
Hmm.
Our State Department would give one of their important people a visa, and they would give one of our people a visa. So big negotiation to get us in country. They didn't want us in country. They accused us of being spies, and with DEA, with federal agencies overseas, you are doing a law enforcement intelligence role in a sense. You're not DEA is part of the intelligence community, but we're not doing intelligence like the Central Intelligence Agency or DIA or anything like that. It's a little bit different how we do it. We're doing law enforcement intelligence, so it's not cyclical kind of reporting where you just keep reporting and trying to pierce into, the espionage aspects of things. We're actually, our end game is very different. And we have to do the end game looking at what's going to happen in a culmination of a judicial process with a trial, people going to jail, right? Some programs we have, I won't talk about them. We don't do judicial process. We're going to do intelligence, right? But it's very few and far between compared to what we're doing, and that is putting handcuffs on people and putting them in prison and accountable through a judicial process. Venezuela was very, very different. So when I got to Venezuela, you have to understand how Venezuela works. It's a socialistic communist country. It's basically the big brother and sister. I say big brother and sister because it's a pretty big country. It used to have a lot of wealth of Cuba.
Mm,
We all know what Cuba is, right? I mean, it's a
yeah.
communistic, it's a small island, right? So you look at Hugo Chavez, who tried to do a coup in the 90s, in the mid 90s in Venezuela. He was thwarted and then put in jail in Venezuela, but after a couple of years, they pardoned him, sent him out. He ran for president, won on the socialistic platform, kind of like we're seeing in New York. And I just heard this individual talk about if we have to give housing free to everyone, we'll do that because it's better than what we have now. And I'm like, wow, that's exactly what Hugo Chavez was
Mm,
saying. Everyone gets a free house. Everyone gets a refrigerator. Everyone free, 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 free. He got in power because the masses voted for it. They all wanted something for free. As soon as he got in power, he started taking away the rights and the privileges of the economy, the business, other politicians, military members, started imprisoning them. And this is the same playbook we've seen since the very beginning, right? So
yeah.
for all the people in New York City who are like, yeah, we get a free house, yeah, we get a free this, it's not going to be free, and it's going to be detrimental to what's going to happen to our country because it all ends the same way. Show me something in our hemisphere that started with the principles of socialism and tell me where they are now.
Right.
Nicaragua,
Exactly.
Cuba, Venezuela. So the list goes on. Look, talk to the Argentinians. Every time, if you ever been to Argentina, I was there multiple times, but when I would go there, they would have an official event. They would have like a moment of silence, and what they're doing is remembering, you know, Pinochet and all these different events in their history where they had a dictatorship and they swear they'll never have it again and all this stuff. So they always have this moment of silence, we will never have that again kind of thing. So, and that's
Yeah.
at the start of all of their official functions.
Mm. Wow, I did not realize that.
Yeah. So go
Let
ahead.
me let me ask this. So as you're in Venezuela, kind of maybe walk us through just like generally how that unfolded for you there. How long you were there, any notable cases? I mean, I'm sure there's countless cases that you work, but any ones that might stand out that you might want to discuss.
So when I landed in country, I remember I didn't really, really get the full scope of what they stood for at the time. And I say they, the government, right? I didn't understand their hatred toward the United States of America. And here I am, 6'5" white guy. I don't look very Latin, but I speak fluent Spanish, right? So I went to this mall called Sambil. Sambil is a massive couple million square foot mall. It has a train station going through it, multiple levels, all this stuff. And I get there and I have my Notre Dame Irish shirt on, you know. And I walk through the mall and I hear a crowd, just everyone screaming and chanting. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Come to find out it was the World Cup. And it was Ghana versus the US. This is in 2010. So I get to this big rotunda area. It's like 5 stories, and then a big crowd below, and then this huge rotunda thing with uh, skylights. And everyone's screaming against the United States, voting, well, not voting, but they're chanting for Ghana and down with the US, right? It was like something you'd see out of an Iranian movie. and they're all chanting it like "fuera, fuera, fuera, fuera," like "fuera, gringo, fuera, Yankee," like this. I was like, holy shit. And I'm like, I'm the only American in this place, and there's tens of thousands of people in this mall. I was like, no one's really noticing me because they're focused on these big TV screens that are all over the place. And I was like, holy shit. I went to the store and I freaking bought like a jersey, like a Boca, like a uh it was a soccer jersey. I don't know if it was Boca. I can't remember who it was, but and I go in the change room, take off my Irish shirt, put on the soccer jersey, and I come out and I'm like trying to hide my gringo-ness. And I'm like,
Yeah.
get me out of this mall. And I got out of the mall. I was like, okay, you need to start framing your mind for what you're doing here, and
Hmm.
what Chavez movement was the US is bad. We're going to denigrate them. We're going to destroy the fabric of their social being, and we're going to do that with drugs, right? As well as they're going to send spies into the country. They're going to compromise people. They're going to do whatever they have to do, kind of like the Cuban playbook. But they have the power and they have the geography next to Colombia, which is a source country for cocaine, to send hundreds of tons of cocaine through Venezuela. And once the cocaine comes out of Colombia into Venezuela, they can do whatever they want. And they move it with military aircraft, personnel, whatever, to semi-submersible subs. They're not really subs, but they're semi-submersibles, LPVs, low-profile vessels, fishing vessels, aircraft of all means, and regular commercial shipping vessels, right? And they're going to flood the U.S. with cocaine. And that's what they started to do. So if you Google and look at aircraft flights, illicit aircraft flights, you can see all kinds of stuff online about all these flights, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flights leaving what's called Apure, Venezuela. Apure was a very remote region of Venezuela. It was used as a launching pad for aircraft to go to Central America. Once it's in Central America, like we talked about, the planes would land or crash land, and then the Mexicans would take it, bring it up, and then to the border of the US. That's what they're doing. But it was a safe zone, like the huddle house of South America, because they could do whatever they wanted because it was controlled by the Cartel de los Soles. Cartel de los
Ah,
Soles was run basically with Hugo Chavez, and then you have the vice president, then you have generals, then you have intelligence, you have police officers, you have all these people, and many of these people are actually indicted right now. You have Nicolas Maduro, you have Diaz de Caballo, Tarek El Asaimi, Nestor Reverol, Hugo Carvajal, and so forth. Hugo Carvajal was a spy master, right? Hugo Carvajal is a very important case. I can't talk about it very much because he has not been sentenced yet. He just pled guilty to a conspiracy case. He's looking at maybe 30 years, 30
mm,
30 years in New York on his involvement in narco trafficking. But he was involved in so much more, and you can read about him. His name is Hugo Carvajal Barrios, and he was called the Spy Master. I had the opportunity to meet him on many, many, many occasions. I'll talk about it now, but after he's sentenced, maybe I can discuss certain things about that.
sure,
Wait and see.
sure.
But Tarek El Asaimi, who was at the time that when I was there, was the justice minister. He comes from a long history of family that was involved, the Ba'athist movement, terrorists out of Iraq and so forth. He's actually sitting in prison in Venezuela right now, but at the time he was the Minister of Justice, and later he was the Vice President of Venezuela. I'm the only
Mm,
agent that I know of, any U.S. agent to have met him. And when I met
wow.
him, he actually threatened me. So I met him on a couple of different occasions. So he's a very violent man, hates the United States, but he sure does love Apple and Chevrolet products. I don't get he'd pull
Right.
up with his entourage, and he'd be in a Tahoe or a Suburban, right? And he'd
Yeah.
have Apple phone and Apple laptop and so all that stuff, and then he'd sit there and try to chew me out for a while, and I'd tell
Then
him,
lecture you a little bit.
yeah, he'd try to lecture me, and I'd say, well, listen, do what you want, pal, but I'm going
Yeah.
to keep do, right? So then Nestor Reverol is another general. He was a general in charge of what's called ONA, and Oficina Nacional Antidroga, which is the equivalent of DEA. And I used to meet with him all the time. And he's another guy that's indicted and
Hmm,
yet to be arrested because they're all hiding in Venezuela. And I used to
okay.
meet him all the time as well because he was my counterpart, per se, even though obviously, according to the indictment, not me, but according to the public document, He was heavily involved in narco trafficking. So all these different people that were working down there have all been accused to be members of the Cartel de los Soles. And the Cartel de los Soles, so our generals have stars, their generals have suns, sol. Sol
Okay.
Spanish, so that's why they call it Cartel de los Soles. They have stars. So you might have a three-star general instead of stars, will be three suns. That's why they
That makes
call
complete
it.
sense. Okay.
And if you look at the recent announcements by Pam Bondi when they're doing designations of terrorist organizations, whether you have gangs, whether you have narco traffickers, whether, like, for example, the Sinaloa Cartel was designated a terrorist organization, right? And then you have mention of the Cartel de los Soles when you have Tarek El Asaime, who at the time in Venezuela was rumored, I'm not saying it, I'm just saying, according to these public documents, rumored to be the member and one of the leaders of the Cartel de los Soles. Well, why is that important that it's coming out in 2025? We're talking, this is back in the day when it was 2010 when I was down there. No one even heard of the Cartel de los Soles that I was investigating, right? Now
Hmm.
in 2025, the name comes out in the Cartel de los Soles, and DEA is not in charge of the investigation. The FBI is in charge of the investigation. So,
Hmm.
what do you think's occurring here, right? I think people are going to be surprised to see the entrenchment into the United States of this organization, not only with the drugs, not only with the intelligence officials, not only with the corruption and all of the lures that they've done within the United States and territories. People are going to be very shocked at the level of what this government was doing against our citizenry here in the United States.
Wow. That is interesting. I'm sure we could spiral down some rabbit holes and just talk about that for
Yeah,
hours upon hours. Uh,
yeah.
Incredible. Well, let me ask you this. In your experience in your international assignments, you gained valuable experience, gained great knowledge, and possessed great knowledge about gangs, criminal, not just drug cartels, but gangs per se. Can you kind of just maybe touch generally on the gangs that you encountered and the extent of their criminal activities internationally? Maybe MS-13 or Trin de Aragua or along those lines.
Sure, sure. So I first was exposed to it, in like 2004, 2005, and 6 in Guatemala, of course, Central America, MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha, which obviously, you're looking at the 80s, the inception of the gang in Los Angeles, and all the return of all these illegal immigrants and immigrants committing crimes in the United States. They put them back in El Salvador, where they grew bigger, stronger, and more prolific, and it spread throughout Honduras, Guatemala, and so forth. And I was there in Guatemala at the time, and I said, you know what? Why don't we do a tracking of all this foreign data on all these guys in jail so that we can share it with the United States? Because we had criminals crossing back and forth the border, going back and forth to Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, US, whether it's Chicago, whether it's New York, whether it's LA, whatever it is. And then so I created this database, which the FBI later took and adopted, and then created another program. At the time, they called it Cafe. I don't know what it's called now, but it was basically the principles of that. So, and that was the beginning. And now HSI and ICE and FBI and everyone else, they all have multiple programs for all kinds of things, right? But that was how I first got into the Mara Salvatrucha. So, and then in Venezuela, that's where Tren de Aragua started back in the 2000s in the state of Aragua, and they were taking aim at all the socialistic projects. At this time, it was a railway. Tren de Aragua means train of Aragua, right? So they would go there and extort all the rail workers that were there on behalf of the socialistic movement, creating this railway. And then it grew into a prison gang. And then it grew into an international gang that spread all over Latin America. And then, like 4.5 years ago, when the border was basically unattended and opened, they said, well, shit, we can go to the US. This is great. We'll show up at the border. They'll give us a phone. They'll give us $4,000 on a debit card. We can go wherever we want. They'll buy us a ticket. And that's exactly what happened. The US helped translate this organization into a multi-state powerhouse. And then, of course, when Trump took over, he said, whoa, 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 we're going to attack this because all of these gangs, whether it's 18th Street, which was a rival for MS-13, and now they're kind of partnered in this fight against the man in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you have, La M, which is the Mexican mafia and the jails, and then Serranos and all these different splinter factions and groups in the United States. They've all had the opportunity to embed and root into our prison system. And that problem grows into another problem. So when Trump decided we're going to take on these gangs in Tren de Aragua and nominate them as foreign terror organizations, he said, we're going to get a hold of this before it gets embedded into the prison system. And I think that was critical, and that's what he's done. And it looks like it's doing its job.
Yeah,
But that's kind of how I got into the gangs working these foreign assignments and exploiting them in their countries where they think they're safe, and then sharing all that information in the United States.
great point. Great point. And I'm kind of moving towards conclusion here, but I wanted to ask you if you could discuss maybe just generally your assignment or being embedded with the CIA during your DEA career. I'm confident you can't get into specific details and that type of thing, but could you maybe just kind of give a general description of what it was you were doing, what DEA does or did at that time working with the CIA?
Sure. So when you're dealing with law enforcement, whether it's CONUS or OCONUS in the United States, the intelligence agencies don't have primus and they don't have authority under the Constitution to bring people to justice underneath the judicial process, right? They're intelligence agencies. So what they're doing is collecting intelligence. They are, and everyone knows this, you can Google it all day long. They are doing espionage and different projects that they have to do around the world to basically gather whatever we need information to inform the President of the United States what we need to do and the leaders of our country in order to promulgate our way of life and to continue doing what we need to do, right? So my job as a DEA agent with CIA was to act as a law enforcement bridge and to do my law enforcement duties because I was not an intelligence officer, even though in Venezuela I was doing this totally separate from the CIA before I ever was embedded with them. I was doing my own projects by myself. I had to go on and do drops, or I might have to do different interactions that would be very much like what a CIA officer may or may not do. I was doing it my own way as a DEA agent, but we were doing things that were could be couched as someone that doesn't know what they are as espionage, right? But it was really me doing my law enforcement work. So with CIA, I had the intelligence officers doing all that work, and then I did the law enforcement work and the bridge work. So if we were trying to go after a cartel and we wanted to take a shipment of drugs off or something like that, I would do what I needed to do with my law enforcement partners and then interface with the agency to make sure they had what they needed to do, any kind of the intelligence network information. And then that's as far as I'll go with it.
Sure.
Uh, if you watch the movie Sicario, you'll see how they had an FBI agent that was kind of tagging along because they needed a law enforcement agent. That was kind of me in a sense. I was
Okay.
very proactive with what I did, and the movie's kind of unrealistic in some things, but the notion of and the constitutionality of having a law enforcement officer, a federal law enforcement agent with them, they could do a lot more things, and they're much more flexible in where they could operate.
Okay. That's a great explanation there for folks that might not realize the various relationships and within the intelligence community and law enforcement. So I got to think that was a fairly interesting assignment for you.
Yeah, I was all over the map doing all kinds of stuff. It was a good and a bad in sense when you're dealing with other agencies, especially when they're not law enforcement.
Hmm.
You have a lot of friction, a lot of abrasive characters and things like that. But overall, it was a pretty good experience because in the end, I was still doing my law enforcement role. I just had to deal with intelligence officers who think a very totally different and distinct way.
Gotcha. But before we concluded here, something that I wanted to ask you about, and feel free, if you don't want to discuss it, feel free. But I gotta assume at some point during your career in DEA, my understanding is there were some threats or death threats or something along those lines made specific to you. Would you mind maybe generally discussing that, whether that happened and maybe what happened?
Yeah, so without getting too deep into it, I had three different um, times contracts put on me in my career, mostly when I was overseas. One time when I was in the United States, but it was an overseas threat, multiple country threat. I won't get into the specifics of it, but what happens is sometimes you might have a threat that, you might have informants that are out there and they're receiving some information. I had one that I could just generally talk about where I had an informant from one part of the world and an informant totally unknown from a different agency, not even in the same realm or zip code, but in another part of the world, both received information about me possibly being set up to be killed on a certain event. So when that all got funneled in to each headquarter of each agency, then it came to my agency. They looked at that data, started filtering it, and they had analysts and so forth. They have a whole process where they look at threats. And then they notified me immediately. I had to kind of hide out for a few weeks. On that case, I hid out in a Pacific Island for a few weeks, kind of waiting to see what the status was, because a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, you have a threat on your life. You can't go back. You can't do this. You can't do that." In one of the cases, I actually didn't. I had information about a threat on my life, but I didn't tell my bosses that I had the threat because I didn't want to be kicked out of the country, the work I was doing at the time. And so I told him I needed a vacation. And my boss at the time, he was actually telling me, he goes, "What do you mean you need a vacation?" I'm like, "Well, I need a vacation." But he said, "Oh, okay, we'll give you the vacation." But these threats that would come in, I didn't want the threats. I didn't want to interrupt my job. I was very focused on my job. I love my job. And I would see sometimes people would have a potential threat or a threat that they weren't sure of, and they would fall apart. They would panic. Some of these guys would panic, and we put guards on their house, and they'd be freaking out, calling, scared, and all this stuff. And I didn't want to be that guy, right? So I'd seen a lot of guys go through this before, and when I went through it, I was just like, all right, what's the threat? Let's look at it. They have teams of people going over this stuff. So a lot of times I would just go hide out and wait for the word, like, what am I doing, right? But my
Yeah.
goal was always get back in and to the fight and do what I was doing. So, and then I had a couple other contracts. One when I was in the United States, and and just viewers that might not be in law enforcement. Sometimes you'll get a threat. I mean, I come out of my apartment with my gun, looking up and down the hallway. That's how I lived for a while sometimes. So the the trade-off of all the excitement and all the sexy stuff you do as an agent, well, sometimes you're living, especially when I was in certain countries, even in the United States, where you have to worry about walking down the street. You walk to your car, you're like, is there a bomb in the car? You're looking for wires.
Right. That's a
And
strong reality.
it's a real reality. And then people might be like, it's bullshit. Well, think what you might, but I'm just telling you, even to this day, I pulled in because you just do it so much for 30 years. I pulled into a parking lot yesterday and there's a bag in the parking space, like garbage. And as I'm pulling up to it, I'm thinking, if that's a fucking bomb, it's not a bomb. I mean, I'm pulling up to a grocery store. I mean, they had no
Right.
clue I was going, but in your mind,
But that's
you
your
kind of kick
mindset.
back. Yeah, it's a mindset, right? And you're like, it's not a bomb. And sometimes, like, if I go out with my wife and I was like, damn, I don't have my gun. She's like, that's perfect therapy for you. Like, don't bring it and put your back facing the door, right? Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And as a cop, like you're always going to have your gun, you're always going to be facing the door, and you're not living like a paranoid kind of lifestyle where you're always looking, but it's always in your mind because you've just lived all the events of close calls, seeing death, seeing all these traumatic things. So that was it was kind of tough to deal with sometimes. And when I retired in 2020, I was in LA, and right before I retired, I had a death threat, contract from a very high level person in a cartel. And I was hiding out for a while. I actually flew to Miami and I hid out for a few days while several teams of people were looking at a bunch of information to see if it was safe for me to get back where I was working. So it didn't even end when I left certain overseas countries. Right now it's great. It's been many years. All the players are, how drug traffickers are. They were killed, dead, imprisoned. So I've been retired for 5 years now. So I retired in 2020. I literally went to my car from my apartment the day I turned 50, because that's the first day that I was eligible to retire. I retired the day I turned 50. I went to the car, I looked at my wife, and I said, "Where are we going?" She goes, "I don't know. Where do you want to go?" I said, "Where do you want to go?" She goes, "Let's go to Montana." I said, "Yeah." We just got in the car and went to Montana.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And stayed there for a couple months, snowed in, 2 weeks into my retirement. I mean, how much beer can I drink and how much can I grill on the deck? And I started writing the book. I started writing a book. And the book that I'm writing is called Beyond Blurry Lines, which is more of a memoir, and it details a lot of things that we didn't cover on this. I just have so much. Sometimes I have to really just cap it because I have so many stories. But
Right.
it kind of chronicles my life in many aspects of my paralysis recovery and the job and many of the things we didn't discuss. But what I can discuss, what I'm able to discuss, and that book will be out next summer. But I
Okay.
wrote it all that first year when I retired, and I memorialized everything because I didn't want to forget everything. So I have that book. It's almost done. I'm going to go back and finish it, and that'll be out next year. But
That will be on my short list of books to
yeah,
order.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll definitely let you know when that's going to be coming out. Beyond Blurry Lines is that one. But so when I retired, then I couldn't stop working. I actually went to work for the Seminole Indian Police, which, a lot of people like Seminole Indians, they own Hard Rock International. So they
Hmm.
own all of the Hard Rocks, and they own 9 properties in the state of Florida. And I was a lieutenant over Homeland Security, which did a lot of executive protection, counterterrorism. So I did
Hmm.
that for about a year when a friend of mine from the agency called me and said, "Hey, I got a director's job, a global director's job, and we're going to do all kinds of stuff, analytics, executive protection, all kinds of high level stuff for a lot of big corporations." I can't talk about the names, obviously, but we did that all over the world, from Europe to Africa to Asia, South America, and the United States. I did that for about a year or so, and then I took another almost a year off. Almost a year off. Have an aging mother, and my stepfather at the time was dying of cancer and stuff. So I want to spend some time with them, and then I went back to work for the state of Florida, actually, and I pulled a portion of my pension from the state of Florida. I worked for as a detective in the state of Florida for about a year and 3 or 4 months, and then I
Oh,
retired from
wow.
that. So yeah, so I went back and got that. That was just worth it, and I worked with a great group of detectives. My partner Scott, a former NYPD third grade detective, great guy. Uh, his whole family's been cops for generations, and he was my partner, and I had a really, really good time working as well as fulfilling getting that portion of a second pension. So, and then I kind of branching into my own thing where I do media consulting. Like, I've been on Fox and Newsmax and different newspapers, consulted on at times from different media groups and things like that, and do some documentaries. Um, I've been very fortunate, blessed to do that. Now I'm going to start doing different speaking engagements and perseverance and how to kind of pull through things that, we all go through and give a perspective on it from my experiences that I had when I was paralyzed and came back to fulfill my whole career and my whole objective in my career field in my life. So it's been a great ride. It's not over
Yeah,
yet.
absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. So your book that's currently out, you have one coming out next summer, and you have a book out now, the Infiltrate America, Blood
Yeah.
Routes and the Rise of Latin American Gangs. What?
Shameless
Yep.
plug, right?
Yeah,
Shameless.
there you go. No, absolutely. I think like I was telling you before, I haven't read it yet, but it's en route, to me to read, and I'm looking forward to it. How would folks get a hold of that book? I did it through Amazon. What's the
Yeah.
best way for somebody to do that?
Yeah. Just go to Amazon, Infiltrate America, or you can go to my website, infiltrateamerica.com, and it'll direct you to the book sales. And also, I have another website that'll be out soon that will detail some of the speaking engagements and things that I could do, media involvement and things like that. So, but I think with this book, Infiltrate America: Blood Routes and the Rise of Latin American Gangs, this was basically a passion project, right? And one of the things I put in the acknowledgments is when you read the book, I talk about these gang members and their lack of quality of life and their lack of, the ability to do things in their countries. And these countries are nothing like the United States of America. You have very low expectation. Your ability to get things done and educate yourself is almost nil. And you're born into this cesspool often of hopelessness and a quagmire of just despair. And but I didn't want people to think that I'm like just siding with these criminal organizations and the members, right? But there's a story to be told on both fronts. But in the acknowledge, I talk about how the book is dedicated to the victims of violent crime and the brave men and women that fight that crime. And I want to make sure people understand that. I don't want them to think I'm some pacifist or anything like that. I don't think that comes across in the book, but that's something important. That's why I put it in the very beginning, because I've been there and I've done it, and I know exactly what it takes to investigate and sacrifice their life. And we have people doing that from whether it's HSI or ICE, FBI, DEA, ATF, or whoever it might be. And we're all and have done and are doing that job to protect the people of the United States of America. And it's very important that you understand as an everyday American, like what is La M? What is Tren de Aragua? What is this? What is that? What are they talking about on the news? What's their history and what's their background? It's just a brief overview. It's not a deep dive. It's a brief overview into what are these gangs existing of and where do they come from? Where are they? And then this chapter, of course, goes into what's the future of these gangs and what do we have to look for and what's going on with the president when he makes these declarative statements of, they're foreign terrorist organizations. Why are we employing the Foreign Enemy Aliens Act? All these things are explained very simply, very succinctly. And I think it's a good book for someone that can say, you know what? I want to learn a little bit about these gangs, what they really are. And that's why I wrote the book.
Outstanding. It sounds like it is a great guide for Americans to review so that they can make informed decisions and have the correct information to make their decisions. So, again, I'm looking forward to reading that as well, and highly suggest it to everyone else. Um, Wes, I think we've covered so much today. I appreciate you. I appreciate your career and everything you did during your DEA career, your law enforcement career, helping keep society safe. And I appreciate you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk with me today to share your knowledge. Thank you, Wes.
Thanks for your service as well. It was a pleasure being here. And, you have a very long career in law enforcement yourself, and it's great talking cop to cop. It really, for me, it's almost therapeutic to do
Yeah,
this. The fact that, people had me on is not only a blessing, but, I'm very, very flattered that you would have me and the people watching. I hope they got something out of this.
I'm confident. I am confident they will. So, yep, thank you. And to my listeners, thank you. And again, I'll end with this. Please continue to like, follow, share, and subscribe my social media so I'm able to bring you top caliber guests to share their experiences like Wes did today. So thank you to my listeners as well. And everybody stay safe out there. I appreciate it. The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.